Recording in progress.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Folks, please try to go swiftly on the sign-up sheet. I'm going to wait until this clock strikes 7, which is actually about 4 minutes past.
Recording in progress.
So, Ally, I guess this meeting's, I can't get audio at the moment for this meeting, but I guess it hasn't started.
Folks, I'm going to ask everyone to stop talking for the moment. It is a little past 7. I want to say right at the beginning, before I open the meeting, there is not going to be time tonight for everyone to speak. If a fraction of the folks in the room and online want to speak, but that's okay, because we're going to set a time to close, not to close the public hearing, but to stop the hearing tonight.
Has the meeting started
And
already?
please
or we just
mute
can't
if
hear
you
it?
are online.
Deb, we can't hear you at home. Deb, we cannot hear you at home.
Oh, sorry. Jacqueline, what's wrong? Do you have me now?
Now we can hear you. Your mic wasn't on.
Yes, it is.
Now it is. We couldn't hear you. All's good. Go ahead.
It was on. Something was wrong at the terminal.
Great. Thank you.
So go ahead. Okay. All right. So folks online, please mute so we don't hear your lovely dogs barking or whatever, so that we can go through this public hearing tonight in an orderly way. Again, before I open the public hearing, I want to just emphasize that we will not have time tonight to hear from everyone, but we're going to come back to this at least in September. And I'm going to explain that again in a few moments. But I want to begin this evening by recognizing a horrible act that took place in our community this weekend. Our community was rocked by a senseless and violent act. Our hearts break for the family and friends and neighbors of the victims. As we gather here tonight as a community, our city council president, who will join us later, is taking part in a press conference with Mary and Ryan where we will learn some more details. So I'm going to ask you, first and foremost, to join me in a moment of silence to honor these families in their grief who are suffering such a horrible loss. Thank you very much. So many of you have prepared for many months and even years along with us to the point where we are tonight, and to be here tonight to speak to this issue. We understand that some no longer feel they wish to speak at this time this evening, and that they're home with their families. So we have offered, and in case anyone is here from that area or listening, to hold a special session with the families and friends of the victims who live in the Nonantum community or anywhere in the city, and or we will offer you the first chance to speak when we hold the hearing open and reconvene in September. And we'll work that out with the community because we completely understand. As I said earlier, I can't tell how many people are in the room, but it looks like, I don't know, 150 people maybe. There are almost 300 online. So that about matches the firearms zoning proposal we had a couple years ago now. And I'll ask in the room for a show of hands for people who were hoping to speak. Could you please raise your hand? Okay, so I think we have that many on the sign-up list so far that I have with me. Folks online, can you raise your electronic hands? I see you already have started a little bit doing that. Raise your electronic hand if you're hoping to speak tonight. Okay, so the open meeting law has become more strict, and we're getting counseled on the stringency of the law by our law department pretty constantly these days. And so we're giving 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes, you don't have to take 3 minutes, for each person to speak in turn. More people will get to speak if you take less time, of course. We are advised not to say anything, not even anything about, agreeing with your neighbor, this and that. And please silence your cell phones. And we can't answer any questions, even to clarify misinformation during the public testimony. However, we are able also to set an end time. So we're going to set the end time for this evening's testimony at 10:15. Then we are going to bring it back into committee, and those of you who want to hear answers to questions that might not be your question, but it might be that 5 people ask the same question, or clarification of something that seems to be misinformation. Those are being recorded, and there will be a summary of those things. Again, not every single question all night long, but a summary to try to make sure everybody hears the same information. We are going to start with a presentation from planning staff so that everybody hears the basics of how the Village Center Overlay District is proposed before we begin the public hearing. It's a bit of a condensed version of what was provided to the council last Tuesday night. And before I do that, I must recognize members of the council and staff who are here and read the items into the record, so bear with me. I'm Deb Crossley, chair of the committee, councilor at large from Ward 5. I'm joined in the room by Councilor Holly Ryan, ward councilor from Ward 8, Councilor Allison Leary, at large from Ward 1, Councilor Vicki Danberg, at large from Ward 6 and vice chair of the committee, and Councilor Lyle Baker, ward councilor from Ward 7. Members of the committee who are joining us online are Councilor Pam Wright, who I believe is out of town. And is that it for this evening? I believe so. Okay, that's it for the committee.
Councilor Krinsman's here.
Oh, thank you, Councilor Krinsman. It's hard to see everyone, and Councilor Krinsman is here as well. So we have a full complement from the committee. We are also joined by Councilors Lucas, Bowman, and Kelly so far. We are also joined by the Director of Planning, Barney Heath, the Associate Director of Planning, Jen Kyra, and the Director of Long Range, the Chief of Long Range Planning, Zachary Lamel. Mr. Kelly Brown is Chair of the Planning and Development Board and will introduce his members.
Thank you, Chair. I'm joined tonight by Lee Breckenridge, Peter Doringer, Kevin McCormick, who's Vice Chair, and Barney Heath is also a member of the board. I think we've got Lakshmi Rao and Jen Malinsky are online. Maybe others, but there's 15 pages of them, so I don't know.
Thank you so much. There is truly a challenge to running a meeting which is both in person and online, but we're going to do the best we can. So there's actually two items before us tonight that we always take up simultaneously. Item 3822 that we started working on 2.5 years ago is the Zoning and Planning Committee requesting review, discussion, and amendments relative to Chapter 30 zoning ordinances by adding a new village center overlay district consisting of four district tiers by establishing requirements for such district and requesting amendments to the zoning map to include the village center overlay district. Item 39-22, we've been carrying for a year or so. It's requesting discussion on state guidance for implementing the Housing Choice Bill, or what many of you know as the MBTA Communities Law. So those are the two items before us. I believe we are, staff is joining me up at the podium to begin the presentation. I think this is about 20 minutes. Try to listen carefully. Thank you for your cooperation and quiet, and we'll pick up again from there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. It's nice to actually see the chambers packed again after many years. So we appreciate all of the effort you put into being here this evening. This is a proposal for the Village Center Overlay District. This is a product of over 2 years worth of community engagement and extensive work with the Zoning and Planning Committee and beyond. The Village Center Overlay District would make it easier to build housing in village centers where people can live close to shops, restaurants, jobs, and transit. We hope to hear from as many people as possible tonight, so this presentation will be a little abbreviated, but we do have lots of materials on our website if you're looking for more. All right, next slide. So this evening, we're going to go over some of the basics of the zoning proposal, how we got here, what this means in relationship to the MBTA Communities Law, and what the next steps will be. There you go. So village centers are where we live, work, and play, and we're incredibly lucky to have these as our starting point. And there's such variety amongst the different village centers across Newton. However, they could not be built under today's zoning. So to ensure the long-term health and vitality and increased vibrancy of village centers, we undertook this effort to look at new zoning. Next slide. So village centers have the opportunity to help address many of the issues facing the city today, allowing for more housing and walkable areas near restaurants, shops, parks, transit. Not only provides more options for all sorts of people to have the opportunity to live in Newton, but it does so in a way that supports local businesses, reduces reliance on cars, and overall uses fewer resources. Zoning contributes to all of these challenges, and the rules in place for village centers have not been updated in over 40 years, and in some of the areas beyond over 70 years. Our zoning isn't working to address today's challenges. Instead, it's contributing to them. Next slide. So there are many components of our current zoning that are working against us and not resulting in the type of vitality that people want to see in village centers. I'm going to focus on 3 of them here. First, multifamily is incredibly difficult to build. The areas which allow for multifamily housing across the city have shrunk dramatically over the past decades. More than 2 units cannot be built anywhere in the city. Height restrictions, floor area restrictions, parking requirements further limit the viability of new housing. Next. Second, attempting to open a small business or expand a successful one is met with a barrage of zoning red tape. Commercial space is what brings people to village centers. to go to a fitness class, to drop your kid off at a tutoring session, to get something to eat, to meet a friend for coffee. All of these things are what really bring life to village centers, and we should be making it as easy as possible for new entrepreneurs to call Newton home. And finally, parking requirements. These rules are the tail that wags the dog. If we want better buildings, better sidewalks, better open spaces, and less expensive housing, we need to look seriously at parking. Next. So all of this brings us to tonight, and the Village Center before you builds upon Newton's strong foundation of diverse village centers, and it expands housing options, ensures quality design in new development, helps create a sense of place to support businesses, enhances safety and equity for all street users, and addresses climate resiliency through sustainable buildings and green spaces. I'm now going to turn it over to Zachary Lamel, Chief of Long Range Planning, to go through the details of the zoning proposal.
Thank you, Jen. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to go into the proposal itself, talking about the overall framework, how it works, and then dive into a couple critical components that are all geared at making sure we end up with a quality product at the end of the day. Next slide. So when we set out on this effort a couple years back, we knew from the get-go we wanted to make sure that what we ended up with was a code that is very simple to use, that is accessible to as many people as possible. And the way that we did that is through a series of 3 principal mechanisms. And if we can kind of understand what those are, then we can have an understanding at looking at any really property that's in the village centers and say, I can get a sense of what can happen there. I can get a sense of a building that is possible. And these 3 things are a building footprint. This is the maximum area or floor plate that is allowed, essentially the area or the perimeter of the building that hits the ground. This really controls the overall mass or the scale. It has a real impact on how we experience the building as we're walking, biking, or driving by. There is also a maximum building height. So essentially that building footprint extruded upwards. This is set at a maximum number of stories and a maximum height in feet. We'll get into the details here, but what we're proposing is a range between 2.5 and 4.5 stories allowed, depending on where you are. And then finally, so we've got the building at the ground, we've got the kind of building in the middle, and then the roof form. This is the building at the top. This is really to make sure that the upper story...
What the fuck is going on?
The maximum allowed here when it comes to the roof form is set at a 1/2 story. That's why I was saying 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5 stories. What this means is that that uppermost floor either has to be a pitched roof or it has to be set back from the floor below it. You've probably seen buildings like this. And really, this is meant to do 2 things. One, it mitigates the overall size of the building, right? As a pitched roof slopes back, we don't really see it as much. Or if a floor is set back from the floor just right below it as well, we don't really see it as much, whether you're walking right next to it or across the street or driving by. And then finally, we want to make sure that this creates some variety in the architecture. We would very much expect to see buildings, a variety of buildings be constructed through this new zoning. And as you're going by, we want to make sure that the tops have some variety and have some different architectural articulation. Next slide. So what do we do with those 3 pieces? Building footprint, maximum height, and roof form. We're recommending 4 distinct sub-districts that would make up the village center zoning proposal. These would be applied, and we'll get to the next slide in a second, uniquely to each village center. And what I was saying before, these would allow a variety of heights and a variety of maximum building sizes. So working from the cores of our village centers, working along major commercial streets, that is where the Village Center 3, the VC3 is allowed, and that's in the bottom right of the screen. That's 4.5 stories max and a 15,000 square foot footprint. And as we work our way out from the center of our village centers, and we move out towards the neighborhoods beyond, we drop down steadily to 3.5 stories, and then to 2.5 stories, and then to an even smaller 2.5-story allowed building when we get into those immediately adjacent residential neighborhoods. And what these images show is essentially a scale of what you could expect in each of these zones. So VC3, VC2, VC1, and MRT, the multi-residence transit zone. Apologies for the acronyms. And if you're still kind of thinking, well, what does this really mean here? How big is this? I think we can look at some recent projects. We can look at Trio in Newtonville, and we can look at Austin Street. Those two projects are larger. Those two projects are larger than the largest allowance within our proposed zoning code. So either A, those two buildings would need to be smaller in some way, shape, or form, or they wouldn't be allowed, or they'd have to go through a special permit process, which obviously brings a lot more discretion and a lot more review by the city council. So just thinking about the biggest thing that we're allowing is smaller than those two projects. And again, that's the point here. We're trying to create a system that's in place that allows smaller infill projects that are appropriate for our various village centers. Next slide. And here's the proposed map of where these 4 districts would land. Like I was saying, each village center is looked at uniquely and distinctly. You can see we focused in on the traditional development pattern that Newton has around the Green Line, around the commuter rail, around the historic mill villages, along streetcar villages. Newton used to have an extensive streetcar network going through it. So you see 4 corners here. You also see Nonantum. And like I said, we looked at each one uniquely. So some of these village centers have all the districts. Some have 2 of the districts. Some have more of one district than the other. We can create a kind of framework that is responsive and making sure we're both looking back and looking forward at the same time here. And just really quickly, so we're all on the same page, the red is the VC3 zone in this map, blue, VC2, the green, the multi-residence transit districts, and then that VC1 is in purple, only along Route 9. So if we zoom in there a little bit, you can see that's the area that's connecting the Elliott Station and the Newton Highland Station, and we'll get into that a little bit more when we bring in the relationship of the proposal to the MBTA community's requirements. Next slide. So, like I was saying, our proposal worked really hard at determining these various metrics, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 stories. And one of the first things we did was go out and look at what's in these village centers right now and what historically existed in these village centers in the past, okay? So 2.5, 4.5, 6-story buildings, these buildings exist already in our village centers. Newton Corner, Upper Falls, they have existed in these village centers for over 150 years. So what we're proposing, our starting point is really looking again at the historical development patterns that have made Newton what it is today. Next slide. In addition to what also exists on the ground or has existed, we also looked at our historic zoning codes, what was allowed, because again, zoning is a framework. It's a guide to what can happen. And when zoning was first introduced in Newton in its village centers and beyond, what was allowed by right is 6 stories up to 80 feet tall. That was in the 1920s. In the 1950s, the then Board of Aldermen lowered that to a maximum of 60 feet and 6 stories. It wasn't until 1987, when the current rules that we have today were put into place, where a maximum height of 2 stories and 24 feet was allowed by right. So our proposal, again, 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5 stories, we believe and we feel fits very soundly into the development framework, again, that has made Newton the city that it is today. Next slide. Also want to go into, okay, well, let's just take a step back. 3 main pieces that determine what can be built: footprint, number of stories, and roof form. I don't want you to think that there's only things that are controlling development. So we have a number of design standards. Design standards are requirements that are in the code that every project would need to follow. And each one of these things is making sure that the building, again, fits and is appropriate for the site that it is put on. And what we did in order to come up with these things was to draw, right? We wanted to test them out. And what you can see here, this is a graphic of existing conditions in Newtonville. This is along Walnut Street, south of the Pike, looking north. And if you go to the next slide, what you could see here is what would be allowed under the VC3 zoning proposal. And we really wanted to take extra care to make sure that when a new building was developed, they would have to do certain things. One, I'm not going to touch on all of them because there's a lot, but a couple really important ones. There's a minimum sidewalk width. The building needs to be set back to create a minimum sidewalk width. That creates an opportunity for things like street trees and seating. We want to make sure that the ground floor has transparency and active uses. We want to make sure that those spaces are going to be available for businesses that people want to frequent, because those are really what give these spaces a sense of vibrancy and vitality. We want to offer opportunities for architectural features to be added to buildings, so that it's not just a flat box, through bays, balconies, bay canopies. These are all things that can be added to a building beyond that maximum footprint. Again, so long as they're creating some texture to the streetscape. And then again, when we get to the rooftop, we get to that half-story requirement that either creates an opportunity for balconies or, again, tapers that upper floor so that it really isn't seen or visible from the ground below. And then not shown here, there are also requirements for parking. If parking is provided, it needs to be behind the building, it needs to be set back. There's screening requirements when it's adjacent to residential neighborhoods. And then when development would occur that is adjacent to residential neighborhoods, there are increased protections. There's increased setback requirements. We're showing 4.5-story buildings. 50 feet or closer to a residential district, it would have to go down to 3.5 stories. So we worked really hard to think about the existing conditions that are there now and make sure that we had smooth transitions when development were to occur. Next slide. I was talking about active uses along the ground floor, and in each of the village centers, we are recommending that certain streets require it if new development were to happen. This map is of Newton Center, and you can see the black lines along Langley, Center, Beacon, Union, subsections of those. Ground floor active uses would need to be required if development were to occur. This happens in all the village centers, but again, it is a subsection, and we didn't want to leave this to chance. We just wanted to make sure that these are really important areas. Next slide. As part of this process, the Zoning and Planning Committee and, of course, the community kind of challenged us about what would happen. Again, what's going to happen if these buildings get built? And we wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive and looked at an analysis of the relationship of the overall building height to the street width. And when we're doing this work, it's really important that our village centers create a certain sense of place. And these spaces really benefit when you're looking at kind of urban design best practices, human psychology, that there's a sense of enclosure, a sense that grounds you to these places. And what these analyses show is that the heights that we're proposing kind of fit depending whether you're on Lincoln Street, Walnut Street, Washington Street, in Newton Corner. Next slide. And I think before I get into the content of this slide, we can look at this picture here. This is Main Street in Brattleboro, Vermont. I think it's a good example of that sense of enclosure. We have buildings that are between 3 stories up to 6 or 7 stories, and there really is a clear sense of space that is delineated here. That's what we're talking about with our village centers. And I think you can see beyond where you get into trees and homes, that changes. There's a very clear distinction between the village center and the spaces beyond. But what this slide is really about is that the zoning allows for parking, but it does not require it on site. And this is really critical because we know through analyzing our multifamily housing that about half of the parking that is available goes unused right now. We have too much private parking that is available on these sites. And from a zoning perspective and from an allowance perspective, we know the market will provide parking. The market will provide what it thinks it needs, but not requiring parking or not requiring too much parking means that, excuse me, we're going to get better streetscapes, we're going to get better design, we're going to look to address our climate goals, right? I think transportation is the second biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and that's obviously vehicle usage for the city of Newton. We're also going to make sure that the people who do need to drive, right? If you have accessibility issues, if you have a large family, if you need to use a car, getting people living in village centers who are able to walk to places, or getting people and making it easier for the people who can bike and walk, will mean there's more space on the road for the cars for the people who do need to drive. The last piece here, it will drastically reduce the cost of construction. I think we're all interested in how we can produce housing that is cheaper and more affordable. An underground parking spot costs $100,000 a piece to build, and the builder is going to pass that cost on to the tenant who's renting it as a residence, or a business that's renting the space down below. Next slide. This is my last slide here, I promise. Affordable housing. Lowering the cost of construction is one way to get to cheaper and more affordable housing. Also, Newton has an inclusionary zoning ordinance. This means 7 units or more being built. There are permanently deed-restricted affordable units that will need to be provided, a certain percentage. As we've just kind of gone over, this zoning allows for multifamily housing to be built. More multifamily housing will mean more affordable units. In addition to that, there are limited instances, specific circumstances where more affordable housing could be provided through a bonus to the specific property. So the building could get slightly bigger, and then they would have to provide 25% or 30%, depending, of affordable units. That's more than our 40B projects. That's more than what we're seeing through the special permit process and what our inclusionary zoning ordinance. So this is really a pathway to create housing at different price points, as well as providing the opportunity to build more affordable housing as well. I'm going to turn it back over to Jen Kyra to talk about the relationship of this proposal and the MBTA community requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. You can go to the next slide. So we started this effort over 2 years ago because we needed new zoning for village centers. However, along the way, the state passed the MBTA communities law. This requires that communities, 177 in total, served by the MBTA, provide zoning that allows for multifamily housing as of right, without a special permit, near transit stations. Now, the slide Zach showed where we dramatically downzoned these portions of the city a few decades ago is not unique to Newton. So the state passed this because this is consistent with what many other communities have done around the region. And Massachusetts has among the highest and fastest growing home prices and rents of any state in the country. These rising costs put pressure on low and middle income families, and they put us at risk of future jobs leaving the state because of the cost of living. So the good news is, though, it's not just Newton trying to solve this problem, that this is a regional effort that includes us and the other communities around us. So this is also a requirement. The Attorney General issued an advisory making it clear that there is not an option to opt out of these requirements, that failure to comply could result in civil enforcement and liability under federal and state fair housing laws. Now, in order to comply, we must demonstrate, using the tools provided by the state, that we meet all district size, density requirements, and the zoning would allow for at least 8,330 units to be built by right near transit stations. And we must have the zoning in place by the end of this year. There's no requirement to build the units. This is purely what the zoning would allow for. So the good news here is that we were already working on this. We were already working on making it easier to build housing near transit when these requirements came down. So we're a step ahead of many other communities in meeting this tight deadline. In going from our first version to our second version of this proposed draft and maps, we only had to make relatively small changes to come into compliance. So by using the state's model and formulas, we're able to show that our version 2 meets all of these requirements. Now, there's a number of ways to get here. You could do a very small district with very high density. You could spread it out over a very large area, meeting just the minimum density, or somewhere in between. We think this strikes the right balance of allowing more density in the core of village centers and tapering down to buildings that are the size of existing homes but allow a few more units on the edges of village centers. This tool and these numbers just show what is possible. It is not any representation of what is likely to get built. So this formula and this calculation does not account for any existing housing, and it assumes that every single parcel is just wiped clean, all buildings removed, and the maximum amount of housing is built on that site with 0 parking stalls. We know this won't be the case. We know many of these sites are not likely to redevelop for any number of reasons. And we know that due to market pressures and financing requirements, that we will see parking. We just don't want to see extra parking built that doesn't get used. So we do hope that housing gets built under this, but we know it will be incremental and spread across the city. Next slide. I can go to the next one. So it's critical that we fulfill these obligations under state law. However, this effort is and always has been about what's best for the future of Newton's village centers. These village centers are the heart of Newton and present an opportunity to make progress on many of the city's goals. The zoning would provide new opportunities for housing for older adults looking to downsize, for young adults looking to stay in the community they were raised, for families who want to raise their children here but are priced out of the current single-family home market. It also provides an increased customer base near businesses and fewer zoning hurdles for new and expanding businesses. And the city is prepared for additional residents. Existing infrastructure is sufficient. New buildings will result in increased tax revenue. And the zoning is focused on walkable areas near transit, allowing residents to drive less. New students would be welcome, but will also be spread across the city, and we have seen through recent development that there are not large numbers of students living in multifamily buildings. Next slide. So this zoning is a result of extensive input from both the community and the city council. It builds upon decades of city plans and policies, and we spent the last 2+ years trying to engage as many people as possible. There have been 4 main phases to get to today. We started with visioning. We turned those visions into a framework for zoning, which then turned into a first draft of zoning and maps, which we've been refining until today. This has been shaped by surveys, vision kits, focus groups, on-the-spot surveying and tabling at events, feedback on an exhibit, info sessions focused village center by village center, meetings with over 60 community groups, and has been shaped and analyzed and refined through over 40 meetings with the Zoning and Planning Committee. We believe that this proposal is good for Newton and for the vitality of Newton's village centers, and we're very excited to reach this point today and to hear from all of you tonight, and then further refine this proposal over the next few months. So the public hearing, which opens tonight, will remain open over the summer as we refine the zoning and the committee has additional discussions. Public testimony will resume in September, and in order to remain in compliance with state law, the City Council will need to adopt the zoning by December 31st of this year. And I'll turn things back to Chair Crossley.
Thank you very much, Jen and Zach. So we have been joined by a few other counselors. I might not get you all. Counselor Kelly is here, Counselor Markowitz is here, and I'm not sure who else, but I know that Finance is in session, and they may be joining us afterwards, and President Albright will be joining us after the press conference. I didn't say earlier, and I really want to say how wonderful it is to see this room filled with our community. We've seen a couple people, one person, maybe 12 people. This is amazing, and it's great to look out and see faces. I know you all come in here with different points of view, but we do want to conduct this in a respectful and, community-friendly way. I'm sure you will. So again, and I do want to say there's more seats up in the balcony, and there's actually some in the front rows, but if you really want to stand, that's fine. I'm going to go through and take the first sheet of signups from within the room. After that, I'm going to take an equal number of people from online, and then I'm going to come back in the room. Again, everybody gets up to 3 minutes. And you don't need to take the whole amount of time. Again, we will stop the hearing at 10:15, and as you just heard, we're leaving it open and going to resume and hear more public testimony in the fall. Of course, as most of you know, if not all of you, we read everything you send us, we catalog it, we keep it on file. It's in every Friday packet. You can read the testimony of all your friends and neighbors and all of the community groups that have been talking to us throughout this couple of years. So you'll notice there's a time clock on the screen. I will be watching it as well, and that will tell you where you are in your 3 minutes. The first speaker is Sarah Rahman, followed by Lisa Adams. And if you each could speak your name, your street, and your village as preface to your remarks. The third speaker is Chuck Tanowitz. So if you could queue up, that might save us some time too, okay? Please go ahead and make sure the mic is on it, and you need the green light should be on. And it is adjustable.
All right.
Excellent. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Causley, and to the City Council and to ZAP for making this public hearing possible. My name is Sarah Rahman. I am a resident of Auburndale, and I am also currently chair of Newton's Economic Development Commission. The EDC has been following Village Center rezoning efforts since they began. Last fall, we submitted a formal letter of support. Okay.
You're good.
Just get closer. All right. We submitted a formal letter of support for the rezoning framework, and we continue to stand by the major points we made then in favor of rezoning, including its potential benefits for economic opportunity, housing choices, and environmental sustainability. Our intention is to submit another formal letter at a future date regarding the current version 2.0 of this proposal. Tonight, for the rest of my comments, I will not be speaking on behalf of the EDC. I'm here instead to share my views as an individual Newton resident. I am joined by a few other EDC commissioners who are here to do the same. As an Auburndale resident, I support the proposed zoning overlay because I personally believe it will be a benefit to small businesses in my neighborhood. The places that my family and I most like to frequent in our village. These are businesses for ice cream, burgers, gifts, toys, fresh bread. They all need customers and foot traffic going through their doors to succeed and thrive. In my view, the proposed zoning overlay would be building a base for those necessary customers. More housing in proximity to commercial space equals more potential customers for the small businesses that exist now and others that may hopefully open in the future. I believe the opportunity for more residents to run more errands and have more choices for discretionary spending create fuller village experiences. And for my village, that would support the future health and resiliency of all Auburndale businesses. Mixed-use development, as provided for in the current proposal's mixed-use priority streets, can be a successful formula. Mixed use is working in Boston's Back Bay and Seaport, where pandemic recovery has been strongest for that city. It's also working here in Newtonville, where new businesses are opening and public space is lively. I, for one, wish there was even more mixed use in this version of the proposed overlay district. To the extent possible, I would urge our city officials to advocate at the state level to allow for mixed-use housing to count towards the requirements for the MBTA communities law. It would be in the interest of our village centers to do so. Let me conclude by stressing, I do not want Auburndale to turn into the Back Bay or Seaport or even Newtonville. I don't even think that's realistically feasible. Rather, I think the zoning overlay would allow Auburndale to be a better future version of itself at the appropriate scale. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right on time. Next, Lisa Adams.
Good evening, thank you. My name is Lisa Adams, and I have lived at 40 Converse Ave with my husband and 3 sons for 13 years. I am also a commissioner on the EDC, but as Sarah mentioned, I'll be speaking as a citizen tonight. I'm here today to offer support for the city's Village Center zoning plan and its anticipated compliance with the MBTA community's rezoning law. As a citizen of Newton, and more specifically Newton Corner, I believe the city's plan strikes a balance between preserving existing neighborhoods and accommodating the need for more housing near public transit. Among the different options that you will hear this evening, I'm here to let you know that there are citizens like me and my family who would like to see Newton enable more family-suitable housing to meet the needs of diverse households. I'm mindful of the parameters that have been set by the state, specifically the MBTA Communities Rezoning Law and Attorney General Campbell's advisory. The law leaves no option for municipalities to close off zoning for multifamily development. And because the AG has advised that failure to comply may result in civil enforcement action or liability under the fair housing laws, Newton must find a way. It really must. As a citizen and former municipal attorney, Newton's noncompliance with the MBTA communities law is not something that I wish to see mired in litigation in our city. To this end, I appreciate the city's thoughtful planning to apply requirements to each village uniquely instead of having the same set of rules for all village centers. The overlay districts are a creative way to responsibly manage growth that is, again, not an option for Newton by law. The AG's advisory also clarifies that communities subject to the MBTA communities law cannot opt out of or avoid their obligations by choosing to forego state funding. And why would we do that? As examples, MassWorks has provided funding towards improving the intersection of Oak and Chestnut Streets and enhancing the Greenway in Newton Highlands. Housing Choice has supported affordable housing opportunities at the Walker Center in Auburndale and the West Newton Armory. These are important projects that are valued and used by our community. The state funding Newton receives to sustain infrastructure frees up funds that can be allocated to other areas in the city budget. The Newton that my family and I would like to live in is one with vibrant village centers, accessible transit, a concern for sustainability and climate issues, and one that attracts new families and businesses. I think the Village Center zoning plan will get us there, and I ask the committee to move forward with the plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chuck Tanowitz, followed by Matt Signeri.
Thank you. My name is Chuck Tanowitz, and I live at 51 Harding Street. I'm also a commissioner on the EDC, and I serve on the advisory committee for the Newton Bike and Pedestrian Plan. Tonight, I am here as a resident, and thank you for allowing me time to speak. I happen to live in one of the best spots in the city, and I apologize to everybody else, but my location's pretty good. I'm just as far from West Newton Square as I am from Newtonville, as I am from Northampton. I mean, I'm even pretty close to Moody Street in Waltham. This means I can get on my bike and run from Schwartz Hardware to George Howell to Trader Joe's to the Paper Mouse all pretty quickly. It's great. But I know that not everybody can do this. And what I like about this zoning overlay is that it makes it possible for more people to live this kind of life. As we've seen in Newtonville, mixed-use development, when put in the right locations, can lead to great things. Restaurants continue to open up along Washington Street and on Walnut. Businesses are moving in. The activity happening there, thanks to the increase in foot traffic, has brought in more business. And most importantly, this kind of development makes it possible for more people to do more trips without their car. They can get dinner, see friends, pick up groceries, get their hair cut, all by bike, foot, scooter, whatever, just not necessarily a car. And studies have shown us that we need to get away from motorized transport in order to meet our climate goals. And that means building the kinds of walkable, bikeable spaces that people want to frequent. Our villages offer tremendous natural opportunity for this kind of development, and this zoning proposal helps do just that. We used to use our villages this way, and that's why, as we've seen, the building heights in villages and centers were higher a century ago than they are now. We got away from that. This proposal offers us an opportunity to improve around both economics and climate, and I look forward to seeing the city move to the next stage. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I need to say, someone online needs to mute. We all set there? Okay, thank you. I hope I got this right. Matt Signeri, followed by Lynn Weisberg. Please queue up.
Thanks so much, Chair. My name's Matt Signeri. I live at 45 Cedar Street in Newton Center, right on the Newtonville border, with my wife and 3 young kids. We've been there for the last 8 years. Like my colleagues, I'm an officer on the EDC, but speaking in a capacity as a citizen tonight. First, I want to say thank you to the City Council, to Chair Crossley, and to the incredible team that does this work. I think, like everyone in this room, I feel tremendous pride in being in the city of Newton, having lived in a number of other cities, and prior to my current role in a University Innovation Center, working for the late Mayor Menino and Mayor Bloomberg. I think the power of community voice in a full room like this one is what has made so many of us proud to be in a thriving and active city like Newton. And one thing I want to point to on this process is around good governance. I think what you saw in the visioning, workshopping, refining, finalizing slide is a testament to the work of Barney and John and Zach and Jen and all the amazing city staff who make these redesign processes possible. They're certainly working harder than those 3 ceiling fans tonight, and I know how many of you in the room have been deeply engaged in this process. It's one with a lot of community outreach and engagement, with significant feedback. It aligns with city goals and vision, and I think ultimately it's one I'm firmly in support of. I think our vision of village centers in Newton and in cities around the Commonwealth is one where they preserve the distinct flavor, as I think you saw across that slide, but that they are a real hub for residents, for visitors from out of town. I, like I do many weekends, spent the last weekend in Newtonville with my wife and kids, with my parents visiting from out of town, and I think being able to go to the new Donut Villa, cross to Ranks, go to the bank, go to the supermarket, do that in a dense, concentrated place is what young families and families of all ages and people of all ages in our city are looking for. I think also importantly, we're trying to build village centers that are truly inclusive spaces that work for everyone, again, residents and non-residents and visitors. The support for local business is necessary. That kind of density helps our local independently owned stores across the city. And the last thing I'll say is, everything I've seen having been a part of this process from the beginning, as my colleagues on the EDC have, is that it's been a pragmatic and sensible approach for our families, for our communities, for our business owners, that preserves financial vitality in the city, which is one of increasing importance in our commercial districts, and also thinks deeply about climate and sustainability to protect the future of our city. So again, I think these inclusive spaces that work for everyone, but preserve the distinct character, as you saw from all those different districts across our city village centers, is exactly what we're looking for. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Lynn Weisberg, followed by Carolyn Stone, followed by Peter Harrington. Please queue up.
Good evening, Chair Crossley, members of the City Council, members of the Planning and Development Board. My name is Lynn Weisberg. I live at 5 Alden Street, and I've lived in Newton for over 30 years. I'm a member of the Engine 6 leadership team, and I speak tonight on behalf of Engine 6. Most of you, I hope, know that Engine 6 is an organization that advocates for more housing in Newton, and this month we actually celebrate our 10th anniversary. Engine 6 has followed closely for the last 2+ years the fulsome discussions about village center rezoning, and we've also paid close attention to the new requirements of the state law, the MBTA Communities Act. The reason that we support the current plan that's before us tonight, VO VCOD version 2.0. I'm just going to say the current plan because that's such a mouthful. We support it because we think it achieves the goals that were set by ZAP. The early meetings of ZAP spent quite a bit of time establishing the goals. And the goals are clear, and the planning department's excellent presentation showed what those goals were, and I'm not going to repeat them tonight. But what unfortunately seems to have happened is that this has become a very controversial proposal. There's one thing that I think everybody sitting in this room and online can agree to, and that is that we need to save our villages. But the question is, what do we need to do to save our villages? Engine 6 believes that the details of the plan are exactly what needs to be done in order to revitalize our village centers. I think it's important for all of the councilors to recognize that this plan is the product of many compromises. Compromises have been made on height of buildings, on size of footprint, on boundary lines for all the different sub-districts that are proposed. And we ask all of you to make sure that there is no reduction, that there is no scaling back of the proposal that's before you, because again, there's a natural tendency to sort of want to make further responses to opponents. That has been done, and it should not be continued tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. You're all so good at coming in just at 3 minutes. Carolyn Stone, followed by Peter Harrington. Please queue up.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Carolyn Stone, and I live in Newton Highlands, south of Route 9. For 25 years or so, I had an office right in the village of Newton Highlands. I'm a retired psychologist. Like, Newton Highlands is peppered with mental health practitioners. And I thoroughly enjoyed being able to hang out there, where I could just step outside and get my lunch, or buy some clothes, or hang out with friends. And now I live about a 15-minute walk away, which I always did. Sometimes I walk to work. The improvements along Winchester and Needham Street are going to make it easier to walk over there. And I still enjoy that it's there. My concerns about this are both to keep that a vibrant and interesting area that draws people to it. And I really think that your plan will do that. I'm also very concerned with climate, and the idea of having more housing near to transportation is just so important for all of us going into the future. I also very much would like to see more affordable housing. I think many people here, I certainly do. I have a son and his fiance. They both have good jobs. They rent. They don't see how they'll ever buy in Newton or surrounding communities. I think that these are very exciting proposals that will meet the goals that were set, and I support them heartily.
Thank you so much. Peter Harrington, you are next, followed by Kimberly Gladman. Please queue up.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, members of the Planning Board. My name is Peter Harrington. I reside at 157 Lowell Avenue in Newtonville. Our paradigm has changed. I think you are using 19th century principles to solve the 21st century problems. The world accepts that there is a serious climate problem, yet your plan to convert our villages into modern heat sinks does not coincide with this concern. The MBTA is a failing transportation system, yet you plan to add thousands of new housing units along the Green Line with the unrealistic expectation that people will give up their automobiles and use the T. The plan to build tenements with 4,000 square foot building footprint on land with no lot size, no FAR, no open space requirements, no green grass for children's play areas is not a plan for affordable housing. It's a plan for tomorrow's slums. Nice when new, undesirable when old. Our 3 commuter rail stations are in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. We've been threatened by the state that funds approved for their renovation will be withdrawn if you don't vote to add thousands of new housing units along the commuter line. This threat is an unconstitutional abuse of power. We should not give in to such bullying tactics. It is not a crime to want to keep the unique character of our city. 50 years ago, Newton received federal recognition as one of the best cities in America to live in. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't want to keep that recognition of our city. There's been a gravitational shift in our world due to climate change and COVID. We're on the cusp of a new era. Artificial intelligence is about to propel us into the future. Whimsical revisions of old arguments, such as Engine 6's claim that increased density will reduce automobile usage, are not the answer. 50 years ago, climate experts said the issue is not the amount of travel, it's the power supply to automobiles. We need a plan, a new plan. We need a plan that will distribute the economic benefits of the commercial expansion in Boston among the communities that are being asked to provide housing to support the expansion. We cannot leave the construction of family-friendly, affordable housing in the hands of a profit-driven building industry. There's an inherent conflict. We can't do that.
Thank you.
You've been working on
Thank
this.
you.
zoning
I'm sorry, it's 3 minutes. Please. I understand, as I said at the beginning, that we have different points of view, but when you do that, you cut into people's time.
You took
Please.
45 minutes for your introduction.
Mr. Harrington, please, stand down. Thank you. No. Come on, folks. A lot of people want to speak. Thank you. Please go ahead. Kimberly Gladman.
Hi, I live on Sumner Street in Newton Center, and I've recently been listening to a lot of people about this. I do want to thank everybody who's worked on this for so long, for years before I tuned in. It's obvious this is the fruit of a ton of work, and this is pretty much what we're going to wind up going with, but we have a chance to really, at this point, just talk about tweaks to this. So I want to suggest two, and I speak as a renter who makes 80% of the AMI. I've been renting in Newton for 10 years. I've rented 4 different apartments. It's clear to me this is not going to change my difficulties with affordable housing much at all. But affordable housing is a controversial thing. I think I have an idea for how we could build support for affordable housing in general so that this is just the beginning. If it's not simply chosen by lottery and it's oversubscribed, but if we earmark these units for civil servants who work here, especially our teachers, our police, our firefighters, most of our teachers can't afford to live here, and our kids know that. And I think if the affordable housing was for them, you would build a lot of support for let's have for affordable housing, let's have more of that. It wouldn't seem like who are these people in these units. The other thing is I agree with the skeptics who are skeptical that we are going to have people living in these mostly expensive apartments who are not going to have cars and who are going to, take the T if we just let the market go that way. I think we are going to have too much traffic. I don't know, perhaps your studies see elsewhere. It's hard for me to believe that people are really going to give up their cars. Could we require, or could you have some kind of competitive, you're more likely to be able to rent this apartment or to buy these units in multifamily units if you don't have a car registered in the state of Massachusetts? Is that a crazy idea? But that would help us reach our climate goals. So that's it. I'll stop a minute early.
Thank you so much. David DeCosimo, followed by Lorraine Sank. Please queue up.
Hi, I'm David DeCosimo. My wife Harmony and our 3 kids live in Newton Corner on 70 Vernon Street, right across the street from Newton Presbyterian Church. Newton Presbyterian Church is one of 3 churches that help constitute Newton Corner's distinctive identity insofar as it has one. And I'm deeply concerned that despite the good intentions of this plan, at least in relationship to this specific case, the proposal is contrary to its aims. Both Newton Presbyterian Church and Elliott Church are, under this proposal, earmarked as MRT. And if you read the New York Times today, you would have seen a story about a congregation that was seeking to sell its historic, beautiful church building to capitalize on the profit of doing so, and neighbors trying in vain to push back against that. These churches are beautiful historic landmarks, and what this proposal does under its current form is essentially incentivizes these churches to look to see their development by making it easier for Church Street in Newton to become Condo Street. So my hope is I deeply see the merit of so much of this proposal, but in this particular course, in this particular specific matter, it is going contrary to what I think are the admirable and good aims of the overall proposal. I'll add as well that if you know this particular part of Newton Corner, you know that on one side of Newton Presbyterian Church is Underwood Elementary, on another side is Bigelow, and then just behind it is the Circle of Death. And what this proposal does is takes an already bad traffic nightmare in which my neighbors and I regularly have people parking in front of driveways during school drop-off and pickup, and it will succeed in making the traffic density even worse. So while I support so much of the proposal, I do, on behalf of folks in Newton Corner, want to push back on this particular dimension of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just use this moment as a reminder for folks to stick around for some clarifications after 10:15. Next is Lorraine Senick.
Yes.
That must be you, followed by Peter Bearer.
I'm Lorraine Sanick. I live at 411 Newtonville Ave in Newtonville. My husband and I bought our house over 40 years and have been living in Newton with our 2 children who now can't afford to live in Newton. I'm very concerned that this proposal goes too far and must be modified. Making the villages overly dense with buildings that are out of proportion is very concerning. As you can see on Washington Street, it's being turned into a canyon, and Walnut Street and Newtonville will be the same way if this is implemented. To make villages less accessible, despite that being the purpose of this proposal, even now with Trio and with Austin Street, if you want to go do your grocery shopping, there's no place to park at Star Market because all the little shops and things have taken up all the parking. And the same is true at CVS. If you're coming home from work or other errands, you go back there to park, there's nowhere to park. So certainly parking requirements would have to be of importance and not assuming that everybody's going to ride their bike. My husband and I are in our 70s, and it's not likely that we're going to be able to do that. I also would like to add that in looking at all these proposals and looking at all the village sites, which I've done numerous times, it seems to place an unfair burden on villages serviced by the commuter rail, which runs 12 times less often than the Green Line. So it seems to me that people who live on the Pike side are at a big disadvantage in terms of what kind of situation we're going to end in, and will become living in canyons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter Bearer, followed by Kathy Pillsbury.
Thank you. Peter Barrer. I live at 60 Endicott Street in Newton Highlands. I'm going to be very brief. I want to thank the planning staff and the City Council for working so hard on this over the past years. You can start counting 2 years or 5 years or 10 years to bring this to fruition. This proposal is very complex, and it's hard to comprehend all of the details. But I have to tell you, I love the result, even though it's so complex. I think it's forward-looking and balances a lot of the pressures. I think it balances all of the pressures that impinge on this planning. And it addresses two crises that are very important to me, which is the climate crisis and the housing crisis. And I'm very glad for the state deadline. So I urge you to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bearer, for your brevity as well. Ms. Pillsbury.
My name's Kathy Pillsbury, 34 Carver Road in Newton Highlands. I've been following the zoning now for a few years. My interest in zoning came from concerns about the impact of land use on climate change. So I believe it's well past time for Newton to change its zoning. We need to allow more people to live near transit and in walking distance with many amenities that our villages offer. I've been active with the Building Professionals Zoning Group. With an MBA and a background as a researcher, I've been doing a lot of data and financial analysis on the zoning. I did a financial analysis that looked at both recent developments and ones in the works. After taking into consideration the expense of new students in the schools, plus the additional expenses of police, fire, and EMS, new revenue to the city more than covered these expenses. With our aging population and declining school enrollments, our schools have the capacity to offer excellent education to our students. The change in age demographics in Newton between 2010 and 2021 is very striking. The percent of the population over 65 went up by 65%, with the 65 to 75 age group increasing 64%. Meanwhile, the percent of children under 10 went down by 8%. Questions have been raised about the MRT districts. I want to address that. Which zoning would builders choose when developing a lot? So I looked at all the MRT lots in Newton and a sample of lots in Newton Center and Newton Highlands, because there's more lots in those areas. I compared the square footage that would be allowed using FAR in the current zoning with adding on to existing buildings and new construction under MRT. Given the small size of many of the lots near our villages and the size of the current buildings that are there, the best option for the majority of the lots would be to preserve the existing house and put on an addition, which I know is what many people are hoping for. The greatest opportunity to impact climate change and reduce the cost of living in our city will be in the VC2 and VC3. With the additional height allowed in buildings, these districts will have more housing, more and smaller units in a building, reduces energy use, there'd be less need for driving your own individual car, and all of these factors also reduce the cost of living. This is an opportunity for Newton to address climate change. My passion for this work comes from a place of hope for the future of my children and all our children who will be living with the decisions that we are making today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pillsbury. I have Marcia Cooper, followed by Jeremy Freudberg.
Thank you, Chair Crosley, and thank you to the members of the Planning Committee. Barney, Zach, and Jennifer, I am so grateful for the work you're doing, and other members of the City Council who have worked so hard to improve our zoning ordinance. Well, the way that many of us see it is if we provide
Can she identify her address? Where are you from? I know who you
Marcia
are.
Cooper, 170 Evelyn Road in Waban, and I am affiliated with Green Newton and Newton Art Association. Anyway, so the many of us see it is if we provide more multi-unit housing options, that will help to avoid one very big problem. That is, from an environmental perspective. When more people are forced to live further away from our transit-oriented locations due to a shortage of affordable housing options in our community, so many of those people will travel greater distances most often in their fossil fuel emitting cars, to commute to and from their faraway homes to get to their jobs. And that results in a very serious increase in carbon emissions. And that is a huge contributor to the impacts we are facing from the climate crisis. Fortunately, a good many people in our community are committed to making progress in achieving the goals of Newton's Climate Action Plan and reducing carbon emissions in our region, especially in Newton. So from an environmental perspective, it makes the most sense to support zoning changes that will make it easier for our community to provide more diverse, mixed-use, environmentally sustainable housing options in bike-friendly and walkable neighborhoods within the proximity of public transit locations. Again, I greatly appreciate the tremendous work that I've seen over the past couple of years and the adjustments that have been made to accommodate different points of view. I hope very much that you will approve these proposals very soon, and I thank you again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Freudberg. And Ann Houston, you're on deck. Could you queue up, please?
Okay. So I'm Jeremy Freudberg, and I am the president of the Newton Highlands Neighborhood Area Council. And as you all know, the Area Council dedicates a significant amount of time at our meetings each month to both present and analyze the latest information from the Planning Department and ZAP. So I know I only have 3 minutes, so I'll try to cover everything as quickly as I can. So back in April, our area council voted unanimously that VC3's 4.5 stories is too tall for Newton Highlands. We also voted unanimously that the potential for 5.5 and 6.5 stories under the affordability bonus is also too tall, and that the bonus should only be available on specifically identified parcels and not left up to chance. And these votes were consistent with previous community visioning exercises. In Four Corners, we are very concerned that the proposal allows too many of our existing commercial uses to be replaced with fully residential buildings. This is inexplicable, and the black lines on the map seem to be randomly drawn. We also haven't been able to make any sense at all of the proposal for VC1 on Route 9. Having more active uses and more driveways on Route 9 is just a very dangerous idea. In general, our area council has heard many requests that light, trees, and open space be maintained as Newton continues to develop. And this proposal fails to adequately provide for these. Finally, our area council continues to ask and voted unanimously for 3D models or other renderings of what could be built under the proposed zoning. Of the few images that were produced by UTIL so far, 3 of them, Lincoln Street at Hartford Street, Cypress Street at Center Street, and the Circle of Death, these were from very uncommon perspectives across unusually wide intersections and do not portray the typical appearance or experience which could be expected under the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedberg. If you have more comments, and this goes for anybody, please submit them to us. Ann Houston, followed by Jay Walter.
Good evening. I'm Ann Houston, and I'm a 31-year resident of 45 Wedgwood Road in West Newton. And I'm really pleased to speak tonight on behalf of the Newton Affordable Housing Trust, which I chair. The trust really wants to commend the city and ZAP and the planning board for an incredibly thoughtful zoning redesign for village centers and the MBTA communities. We believe the proposed zoning will go a long way to creating active and vibrant village centers while responding to the unique character of each village and also expanding the supply of affordable housing, which is our primary concern. Newton Affordable Housing Trust is pleased to provide comments on the proposed recommendations, and we're going to focus on areas that directly impact affordable housing. In particular, we support the increased height proportionate to the village center size. We know that modest increases in building height can increase the number of units in a property, which under Newton's inclusionary zoning translates into more affordable housing. Second, we support the elimination of lot area per unit minimums, which encourages unit configurations designed to respond to market demand. And we support removing minimum lot size development, which encourages more development on smaller lots, which are common in our village centers. The Affordable Housing Trust strongly supports the sentiment informing the reduction of required parking for residential units. And we know that excessive parking requirements reduce the number of residential units and increase the cost. And finally, the trust endorses the proposed height and parking bonuses in return for deeper affordability than would be required under the inclusionary zoning ordinance. We recognize the importance of increasing affordable homes to meet the needs of the more than 30% of Newton residents who are housing cost burdened, paying more than 30% of their income for housing, as well as contributing to the Commonwealth's need for housing production. So we're really encouraged by Newton's continuing attention to the need for broader range of housing options, and especially for options affordable to residents of low and moderate income. This trend bodes really well for a vibrant community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Houston. Jay Walter, you're last on the first page, and then I'm going to go online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jay Walter, 83 Pembroke Street, Newton Corner. I'm a local architect and a member of the Building Pros Zoning Working Group. I think most of you recognize me after literally years of public testimony. You know that I support the proposed zoning, and you know why. So tonight, instead of arguing the merits, I would like to use my time to address the process and the quality of the debate. I know some will argue that the public has not had the ample opportunity to speak on the issues, but what concerns me more is the fact that, given the opportunity, some of the public have used the forum to defame and ridicule public officials, questioning their motives and their interest. As if public comment gives license to throw around accusations like the city council is in the back pocket of developers, or this proposal is a giveaway to developers. This proposal is intended to make developers rich. Instead of arguing the merits, they attack the supporters with innuendo. Just because somebody doesn't agree with you doesn't make them corrupt. Quite the contrary. Instead of enriching themselves, as the detractors imply, the planning staff have sacrificed a great deal. Many of the planning department are young adults with young kids who continue to work long hours and attend evening meetings that run well into the evening, month after month, to craft this proposal. Councilors have had to face derision and scorn when they're simply trying to explain their positions. There is no conspiracy here. This strategy, common in today's politics, of going after your opponent is ugly and unnecessary. Constantly attacking developers also reveals a basic misunderstanding of how things get built in America. Looking around, almost all of us live in a house built by a speculative builder. This is the case for all but the oldest and the grandest of homes. Over the past 300 years, that's how our buildings got built. Many of our city fathers were land speculators. Edward Jackson subdivided his farm to sell housing lots when the railroad came through in 1830. John Kendrick, who lives in the historic house on Waverly Avenue, supported by historic Newton, subdivided his land around what is called Kendrick Park in Newton Corner, and the list goes on. So instead of deriding this proposal as a gift to developers, try to understand it as an attempt to better control development and push it towards what the city needs and wants. Provide constructive criticism
I'm
that
sorry,
improves.
Mr. Walter, you are out of time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. And again, anyone can submit in writing if there's more they wanted to say. Now I'm going to go online and take people in the order I see their hands. First two are Carolyn Gabay, followed by Peter Bruce.
Thank you. This is Carolyn Gabay. I live on Doris Circle, and I'm a member of the Newtonville Area Council. As many people know, the Newtonville Area Council circulated a survey recently trying to get community input to convey to the City Council. We included unbiased educational information about the 2.0 proposal and asked for community input specific to the Village Center upzoning district in Newtonville, not the MBTA law. And we received 534 non-duplicative responses of residents, both within and without the catchment area. Unlike the planning department's polis and feedback tool, which did not filter out duplicate multiple responses, including responses from people from out of town, we have filtered them out, and these are the responses of 534 Newton residents. Bottom line, 30% favored the proposal, 70% opposed the proposal. We left space for residents to include open text responses, and we received 225 of those. I'm now going to read at random from those responses. These are not my feelings. These are the feelings of 225 people of 534 responses. A pro response: we need more affordable housing in this city to keep it vibrant and diverse. Another pro response: let the market determine how much parking is provided. A con response: we need a citywide vote. A con response: the proposed zoning has been not well communicated to the public. It's a giveaway to developers. It will not result in significant increases in affordable housing. A con response: there has to be a better way to meet housing demand that meets community needs, that doesn't feed the greed of developers. Small development across all Newton instead of ugly apartment buildings and equally ugly McMansions that take up space and nobody lives in. There needs to be green space in all of these areas. Almost all of Newton's recent apartments are not suitable for families and children. A con response: do not permit by right development. The motives for the rezoning are sound, but the actual proposal does not include guardrails that would prohibit developers from abusing the new construction opportunities. An in-between response: while I am fine with greater density growth on Washington Street, and I like what has been happening on Austin Street for the most part, I feel strongly that the Village Center on Walnut Street should have lower skyline and should have open green space, even if just in small amounts. Trio on Walnut Street would feel alienating, and I wouldn't want to shop there or do my banking there. Another one: I am probably in the minority, as we will have to absorb Northland.
Ms.
let
Gabay?
alone- Thank you.
Sorry, you've run out of time. Thank you very much.
We will submit the entire survey.
Thank you. Next is Peter Bruce, followed by Jennifer Sulla.
Peter Bruce, Clapham Place. Can you hear me?
Yes?
In Newtonville. I'm going to speak about how cherry-picked data shapes housing policy in Massachusetts and Newton. In Massachusetts, we don't plan housing with realistic numbers at the state level, and Newton's leaders follow the state numbers.
I can't hear him, Madam Chair.
No, Mr. Bruce, could you speak closer to your microphone on your computer, please?
And let him start again, if you would.
Should I start again?
I'm sorry, we can't do that, but could you please keep going? I'll give you the couple of seconds you just lost. Go ahead.
Newton's leaders follow state numbers, which lead them to fly blindly into building. After a recent query to the mayor's office, I found her claim in a recent update that the state needs 200,000 units was cherry-picked from the 2021 Blue Ribbon Report, Preparing for the Future of Wealth, for the future of work in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That's an excellent report. I hope everybody reads it, but it's been used in a biased, inaccurate way by the state, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and local leaders. That report said that its conclusions were tentative, that it was not making policy recommendations, and that we would need to produce from 12,500 to 20,000 new housing units per year over a decade. The lower end of the range, 125,000 over 10 years, has been obscured by leaders all over the place. And instead, they treat the 200,000 number as if it were gospel. Furthermore, even the need for 125,000 units might be too high, since the worst case assumption that was made in the report is that Boston's commercial real estate would decline by no more than 20%. Well, it's at 18% as of the last quarter of last year, according to the Boston Globe, and it's at 24% for Class B office buildings, which is below that level. Now, we all know that state workers have been authorized to work from home. They aren't working as much in Boston. Lots of businesses are moving out, and they aren't renewing their leases. So even the 125,000 units in a decade might be, it's more realistic than 200,000, but why are we, the 175 MBTA communities, being tasked with building 300,000 units? This is not realistic. And Newton's 8,330 follows the same unrealistic logic, especially since housing built by municipalities that are excluded from the MBTA Communities Act, like Boston and Springfield, will be building tens of thousands of units that will count toward that 125,000 or whatever that real number is. We should protest our leaders attempting to mislead us with misleading numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. Jennifer Sula, followed by Dan Powdermaker.
My name is Jennifer Sula. I live at 17 Monroe Street, which is about a 15-minute walk, 10 minutes maybe, from Walnut Street in Newtonville. It's an area with lots of multifamily homes and some light manufacturing, for example, storage and shipping. I'm very much in favor of the zoning redesign, and I do greatly appreciate the city making the effort to incorporate residents' constructive comments on the redesign proposal. My support falls into two buckets: climate change and quality of life. First, climate change. I think we need to stop prioritizing cars and instead prioritize public transit, walking, and biking. This means that our daily needs for work, school, and life must be aggregated in a smaller place. That is, we need increased density in the form of multifamily, multi-story housing near public transit and retail without unnecessary parking requirements. We shouldn't use the T and commuter rail woes to resist trying to do what we can. Instead, we should work with the state and the federal government to improve the T and the commuter rail. Second, quality of life. I've lived in Newtonville for just over 20 years. My husband and I raised our two sons here. It's vastly improved in the last couple of years. We have wider sidewalks. It's easier for pedestrians to cross Walnut and Washington Streets, benches and gathering places along Walnut Street. There's more restaurants. It's just generally more vibrant. I have to believe it's not a coincidence that we've recently had two developments in Newtonville. And I can walk to everything, including two grocery stores. The only thing I can't walk to is my doctor. And I take the commuter rail to work in Boston. I've taken the bus and the commuter rail for 20 years to work in Boston. This means I don't need to drive that often. I don't have to think about parking. I don't have to deal with snow and ice in the car in the winter. It also means I walk more, which is healthier and makes me more connected to the neighborhood. Finally, we've been extremely lucky in raising our sons here and being so close to a fabulous city like Boston. I want our city to be a part of the solution to the Commonwealth's climate and housing issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sula. Dan Powdermaker, followed by Henry Dorkin.
Good evening. I'm Dan Powdermaker. I'm a resident of Newton since the late 1960s, and I currently live at 119 Lincoln Street in the Highlands. I'm a member of the Building Professionals Group and have actively watched the work of the Planning Department and the Zoning and Planning Committee over the last 2 years as they've put together this overlay proposal. I'm supportive, and I applaud these efforts.
Gotta move back.
And thank both the department staff and committee members for their repeated outreach to the community. Over the last 20 years, my brother and I have rehabbed, reconstructed, and updated a number of houses in Newton. And I would like to share a real case study of what the MRT aspect of this overlay zoning proposal would do if it was in effect at the house that we bought and redid. In 2018, we purchased the house at the corner of Lowell Ave and Page Road in Newtonville. Some of the city councilors are familiar with this property. It is 33 to 35 Page Road. It was a 7-bedroom, 7,000 square foot house that was occupied by one man plus 2 caretakers at the end of his life. The house had a 2,000 square foot footprint. It was zoned 2-family, but had been used as a single family. It had been built as a single family. And we did a gut rehab. We built 2 luxury 3,500 square foot luxury townhouses, which is what we were allowed to do by current zoning. We increased the footprint by 8%, by 165 square feet, and we doubled the size of the existing garage to provide parking. If this overlay zoning proposal that's being debated had been in effect, and if it covered this property, a property 3 blocks from the heart of Newtonville, we would have built 4 units. We would have kept the same exterior structure, the same footprint, the same total number of parking spaces, and the house would have looked exactly the same from the street. The 4 units would have sold for significantly less than the $1.7 million that the 2 units we were allowed to build were purchased at. Now, I mentioned that some of the city council are familiar with this property, and the reason I know that is when we put up the for sale sign, one of the city councilors tweeted, "This is what the private market is building in #Newton, Mass." And then tweeted again, "It's not about not welcoming anyone, just noting it's very expensive." And they went on from there and said, "I'd like to see us be more creative." It's my hope that this councilor and the rest of the city council vote in favor of the zoning reform that will help achieve the desires expressed in the tweet, reform that incentivizes preservation of existing properties, reform that moves the dial on affordability. This example is not an aberration. I could give more, and I will submit those. And finally, we would have built parking, as would any developer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powdermaker. I need just a second. When we went to the full screen, the order changed. Next is Harry Dorkin, followed by Emily Cagwin, and then Steve Burnham.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Dr. Henry Dorkin, a specialist in pediatric pulmonary medicine. My wife and I are residing homeowners and empty nesters at 75 Evergreen Avenue in Auburndale, having moved here in 1986. I'm speaking about 2 somewhat related issues which I have not heard addressed well tonight. First, my concern about increasing population density. As a physician at the academic hospitals in Boston, I, like many other Newton people for various employment opportunities, have been commuting into the city for almost 40 years. When I started, if you got on the turnpike by 7 a.m., you had no difficulty or significant delay. Now, because of traffic density, that time has been pushed back to approximately 6 a.m. Any later, you have to travel down Washington Street to Charles Bank or spend a lot of time on Route 90, otherwise known as the morning-evening parking lot. You postulate that the majority of these new residents will take public transportation and not add to the traffic congestion and parking. That would be great if it occurs, but I am a bit skeptical. If you are wrong, how do you propose to handle an increased traffic problem? Also, emergency rooms around the state have been hammered over the past 2 years, not just from COVID, with waiting times quite prolonged. Aside from the issue of whether Newton Wellesley Hospital can handle the increased volume, you have to realize there are concerns that ambulances heading into town will have issues with increased traffic congestion, delaying safe transport. For understandable reasons, I don't see any new roads or access as part of this plan. I would like to hear how Newton plans to deal with both of these issues before I will feel good about the plans on 2.0 tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dorkin. Emily Cagwin is next, followed by Laura. I can't read it from here, but I'm sorry, you know who you are. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. My name is Emily Cagwin. My family has lived on Taft Avenue in West Newton for almost 11 years. Tonight, I'm speaking as co-chair of UCAN, which stands for Uniting Citizens for Housing Affordability in Newton. UCAN is a local group that advocates for the creation of affordable housing options in our city, with a focus on very and extremely low-income families and individuals. We strongly support the Village Center Overlay District zoning proposal and the additional housing capacity it will create to help address the national housing crisis that directly impacts our state and local community. Low-income families and individuals include people working in professions that are extremely important in our community, like teachers, certified nursing assistants, and first responders, to name a few. But the lack of affordable housing in Newton means that many people working in jobs that serve our community can't afford to live here, leading to long commutes for employees and staffing challenges for our local businesses. The proposal also enables Newton to meet the requirements of the MBTA Communities Law, which is a critical step in addressing our region's intertwined housing, climate change, and transportation challenges. As an organization that is well-versed in the multitude of roadblocks that slow or stop the creation of critically needed housing, we know that the Village Center zoning overlay districts are not a silver bullet that will solve the housing crisis or lead to immediate changes. But we strongly support the progress towards a more consistent process for housing creation in a wider range of projects, including smaller multifamily units. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's Laura DeVoe is next, followed by Emma Vasey.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura DeVoe. I live in Newtonville on Proctor Street. I'm the Vice President of the Newtonville Area Council. As previously noted by my colleague, Carolyn Gabe, we provided a survey between the dates of May 25th to June 18th via SurveyMonkey. The survey was created by a group of 5 individuals of differing opinions, including Dan Cohen, Peter Bruce, and fellow NAC members Carolyn Gabe and Ralph Abelli and myself. I'm here in my capacity as a NAC Vice President and Working Group member. Despite this short period of time, we were fortunate to receive 534 responses to the survey, with 277 submitted in the Newtonville catchment area. Participants indicated that on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being uninformed and 5 being highly informed of the ZAP Village Center rezoning plans, the mean and median were a 3, not entirely surprising. 79% of submissions live in wards 1, 2, and 3. 72% of the submissions lived in the city of Newton for over 15 years. All these points are important. 3 themes were clear in the analysis of the data, which I think you all need to know. First, height matters. With the full survey population indicating they are not as concerned about occupancy of the buildings versus height, participants were asked about height both with and without affordability bonuses. The majority of survey respondents indicated that on both Walnut Street and Austin Streets, the height should be no more than 3 stories, with Washington at 4. However, when we pull out the respondents who have lived in Newton less than 15 years, making up 28% of the survey respondents, something interesting was discovered. 32% of this population approves of the height limits of 7 stories on Washington Street. This is actually the majority of the group. This data point is important, and it is supported by sentiment submitted in open-ended questions where inventory of affordable housing was a notable concern. Second, parking use is variable based on distance to the village center and length of time living in the city. Respondents living closer want to walk. Those who've lived here longer want cars. Finally, there is a common ground. 70% of all survey respondents oppose the 30,000 square foot by right. This cuts across length of time living in the city, sentiment regarding high density and mixed use housing, all of it. This opposition also highlights a lack of trust in the process in terms of their sentiment, in terms of what they've said in their comments. I would ask the City Council and the ZAP to please keep this in mind. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. DeVoe. Emma Vesey, followed by Fred Smith.
Hello, my name is Emma Vesey. I live on Highland Ave in Newtonville. I've lived here 35 years or maybe more. I love the goals that the Planning Committee lays out for more affordable housing, for small businesses and the environment. We need these things desperately, desperately. However, monolithic permit-free high-rises will not bring that about. If you take a look at Trio and Austin Street, what you see are expensive leased apartments and lots of concrete. Somehow, one developer now owns from Whole Foods through Newtonville into West Newton. And that doesn't look very likely to bring about the beautiful vision that the zoning board showed us the slides of. But it looks like it'll be more large buildings like Trio. Now, my understanding, and I may be wrong, was I heard it said that when there are commercial businesses at ground level, those buildings do not count to fill the MBTA mandate. But if we do have big buildings in Newtonville, obviously they will have to have commercial shops and things, and so it doesn't seem to make sense to me. Also, importantly, unless and until West Newton and Newtonville have decent commuter rail stations and train and bus schedules, they can't be called real public transport accessible. It just is never going to make sense for people to leave their cars behind unless they do a strict 9 to 5 commute into Boston and back. That's all I have. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you very much. Fred Smith, followed by Dan Rubin. Fred Smith, you're muted. Mr. Smith?
My name is Fred Smith. I live at 89 Needham Street in Newton Highlands. I'm a 78-year-old retired physician. My wife and I recently sold our home of 30 years on Long Island and moved to Newton to be near our daughter and her family. We rent a 2-bedroom apartment with balcony in the Avalon Newton Highlands complex. We enjoy the landscaping of the courtyards and the many trees around us. After moving in, we discovered that there are quite a few affordable apartments for families with below average incomes. We're happy with the social diversity we encounter every day, and now that school is out, with the voices of children at play in the courtyard. And we're delighted with the diverse housing in Newton and the many wooded copses scattered around the city. 399 years ago, poet John Donne wrote, "No man is an island entire of itself." Newton is an integral part of the Boston metropolitan area, and its success cannot be separated from that of Metro Boston. Massachusetts and our area are losing population. Many of Newton's own city employees cannot afford to buy a house or rent here. If what I've read online is correct, the city's median income is $154,000 household income. Based on the same data sources, it appears that the annual median wage of teachers, police, sanitation workers, and firefighters is in the neighborhood of $70,000 to $75,000, again, median income. A range that's considered very low income by housing and urban development. The average annual pay for Boston Hospital patient care associates, which is my son's job on Long Island, is a little over $40,000, or extremely low income by HUD standards. 16% of Newton families are parented by one person, the great majority by single moms. I can understand the wishes I've read and heard from residents who believe that increased housing density will destroy Newton's charming character. However, if we want Newton to remain a city with a diversity in age, income, and ethnicity that results in the vibrant creativity that renews great cities like New York or Boston, then we need to make our housing affordable to our workers and to young people who grew up here and for others who want to move here. In particular, I urge the zoning committee and the council to encourage the development of mixed income buildings that have rental units, enough rental units for those who are in very low and extremely low income categories. Families whose income is at the 30% and 50% levels of the median income of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, Dan Rubin, followed by Constance Cork.
My name is Dan Rubin. I live at 175 Auburn Street. Recently, I had dinner with my friend Carol and her daughter Emma. Emma and her partner plan to move back to the East Coast from California. They would like to move near Emma's parents, but they can't afford to. They're priced out of the market and will move to Maine instead. Sound familiar? We need more housing. My friend Susan's landlord raised the rent on her Wayland one bedroom from $2,000 to $2,500, so Susan will move to Worcester. On her commute, her car will spew carbon pollution all the way from Worcester to Boston. We need more housing. An acquaintance, Diane, has a low-paying job. Her landlord raised the rate on her Watertown apartment from $1,200 to $1,800. Diane told me that she's in crisis and doesn't know what to do. We need more housing. Most people here tonight have similar stories. We are losing our friends and loved ones because they simply can't afford to live in Greater Boston. Because Newton and nearby cities keep the supply of housing far below the demand, we price our young people out of the market. We price working class people out of the market, and we price many middle class people out of the market too. We need more housing. Massachusetts is the fourth most expensive state to buy a home and the third most expensive state to rent. So it's not surprising that our population has declined by 110,000 since 2020. We need more housing. Some say that more factors impact housing prices than supply and demand. That's true. But supply and demand is the most important factor. In any Newton village, when there are 50 home seekers and only 25 sellers, prices go up. That's true for both buyers and renters. So what kind of housing do we need? We need housing that reduces the greenhouse gas emissions that make climate change deadlier. We all smelled the Canadian wildfires. They're yet another reminder that we must change and change fast, or our youth face a tragic future. The housing we need is small, energy-efficient units near transit, jobs, and shopping, just like the housing that would be enabled by the Village Center zoning proposal. We don't need more large single-family homes near 495 that require builders to chop down forests and that compel residents to drive every time they leave home. Governor Baker championed the MBTA Communities Act to address the housing and climate crises. Governor Healy campaigns for that act now for the very same reasons. Let's pass the Newton Village Center zoning proposal that will enable Newton to comply with this MBTA Communities Act. Let's do it ASAP. We need more housing and we need it in our village centers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin. Next is Constance Cork, followed by Ray Heffling.
Thank you for putting together a comprehensive proposal that balances a lot of contradicting needs, if you will. I'd like to just share a couple of things from my experience. I moved here 6 years ago from downtown Boston to Newton Center, and I am on the edge of one of the VCOD zones. I'm in a 5-unit condominium building and thought that it would be great to be able to use just the subway to get to and from work and use public transportation to live here. That hasn't happened. There aren't places near Newton Center to grocery shop, for clothing shopping, for the basics for life. So I've had to purchase a car in order to live to Newton. And I think that a lot of people that you're thinking you're going to move out here will need a car as well. Where's a family on a modest income going to go grocery shopping and clothing shopping and school supply shopping? It's not in our village centers. Those are lovely specialty shops. They're lovely, but they're not going to meet those needs. So I would urge us just to think a little bit further about the density, who's actually going to be living in the village centers, how they're going to be living, what their needs are, and what our needs are. In the 6 years I've lived here, I'm at the corner of, I'm on Beacon Street between Center and Crescent. Traffic congestion has expanded. There are fender benders every day, and with the expanded congestion, it backs traffic up down past the Mason Rice School to the west and down past the post office to the east there. I only see that getting worse if we're going to add to the density around the public transportation centers. So like one of the previous speakers, I would suggest we take a look at expanding zoning laws overall and providing for AUDs or other ways to reutilize some of the larger homes that might benefit from multifamily dwellings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Ray Heffling, followed by Howard Rossinoff.
Thank you. I'm Ray Heffling. My wife and I have lived at 132 Cherry Street in West Newton for 47 years, and I retired last year. Riding a bike is not a realistic option for me and many, if not most, of Newton's senior citizens. I'm concerned about open space, parking, density, and congestion within village centers, as well as the city's infrastructure capacity and reliability, including water, sewer, power, emergency services, and schools. Waiving parking requirements will have an adverse impact on residential streets adjacent to the overlay districts. Also, increased vehicle traffic associated with the increased density and retail businesses will exacerbate congestion in already overloaded village centers, such as the intersection of Chestnut Street and Washington Street in West Newton. Tonight's presentation included photos of existing buildings and referenced current and previous zoning regarding building height as partial justification for the proposed by right building heights. I wonder how many of the buildings shown and how many of the buildings that have existed in our village centers were built by right as opposed to by special permit. I agree with the previous speaker from Auburndale that the proposed zoning overlay will build a larger base for existing small businesses, but I caution that it will also result in more business competition for those businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Howard Rossinoff, then Cerise Jaffe.
Thank you. Howard Rosenoff, 9 Vincent Street in West Newton. State law requires 8,330 by right dwelling units. The proposed zoning will enable more than that, estimated at 10,000 units on a little over 3% of Newton's land area. The city has attempted to explain this overcompliance, but I don't completely understand why it is necessary. I would like to see VC3 areas changed to VC2 to the extent possible. VC3 areas along priority streets wherein first floor retail or commercial use would be required don't even count against our obligation under state law. You may possibly be able to downzone all of VC3 to VC2 and still be in compliance. I bring this up not simply because I prefer my part of Newton to remain as a suburb of Boston and not become an extension of Boston, although that is very much the case. It's also because smaller multifamily buildings are more likely to be affordable to moderate income families that seek to build equity by living in one unit of a building and then renting out the others. Smaller buildings will help create paths for upward mobility similar to those that American families have used to great advantage in the past. That includes the family that I grew up in. Further, your consultant Util has told you that larger buildings are generally more profitable as rentals, while smaller buildings are more profitable as condos. Opportunities for individual unit ownership can also help people move up. Conversely, a VC3 building of between 5 and 7 stories, depending on its percentage of subsidized affordable units, is almost certainly going to be owned by a corporate landlord rather than a moderate income individual or family, and it is most likely to be offered for rental rather than unit ownership. You can reduce the sizes of buildings in our village centers while still being in compliance. I urge you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm asking the clerk to go back to the yes, because it keeps changing the order when it goes to full screen. So, but Cerise Jaffe, you are next.
Thank you. I'm Cerise Jaffe. I live in Newton Lower Falls on Halburn Road. I've done so for 40 years. I live in a modest-sized house on a small lot. I'm not speaking from the perspective of a Grand Victorian or a modern McMansion. I'm very sympathetic to the plight of those who want to move into Newton and the need for housing, or for those who want to downsize in our city. However, the very aspects that makes Newton so appealing as a place to live, our close-knit communities or green space, the variety of housing insofar as not being cookie cutter, and our very distinct village centers are in danger of completely disappearing if this zoning proposal is passed. I also worry greatly about the loss of many of our historic properties that are not officially landmark, and most are not. this would be a tragic side effect of the zoning redesign. I am in favor of increasing housing. However, I am not in favor of doing this by building high-rise apartment buildings and adding density to village centers or elsewhere. I believe that this increase in density and the accompanying loss of green space and community will not make our city more vital or accessible or desirable. In fact, I believe it will have the opposite effect. It is well known that home ownership is the key to creating more economic and racial equity, as the previous speaker alluded. I fail to see how this new zoning proposal will promote that. Where are our starter homes or garden apartments that could fulfill this vital need? They're certainly not in those high-rise apartment buildings. The removal of special permits for projects less than 30,000 square feet is a very dangerous and slippery slope. Why should the people of the city agree to remove this kind of oversight and allow developers free rein to build and overbuild with only profit as their goal? I can't think of a less progressive tool to improve our city. Like it or not, we live in a suburb. People shop, work, visit, and seek entertainment all over the place. We drive to Costco in Waltham or Walden Pond in Lincoln or up to the Burlington Mall. People, especially now, do not just commute back and forth to Boston. It is a fantasy to think that people will have their needs fulfilled by walking to these small, charming village centers now encompassed by huge high-rise buildings. I think this is a foolhardy fantasy for Newton. Because there is no interconnected, rapid, and frequent public transport in Newton, nor is there any in this plan, I think it will leave people stranded, and it will make the kind of city that doesn't work instead of one that is greatly improved. And lastly, I'd just like to say that despite the statistics that the Planning Committee cites and how they've tried to provide outreach, I have found it to be very, very faulty. I don't think many people saw the exhibit at the public library. It was squirreled away in a very small space. I think all the information that is being provided has a real feel of being selling a proposal rather than genuinely asking for feedback.
I'm sorry, Ms. Jaffe, you are out of time. Thank you. We have one more online, and then I'm going to come back into the room, and it is Mark Hirschman. Mark Hirschman, are you there? You need to unmute if you are there.
Hi.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm Mark Hirschman, 162 Cynthia Road, member of the Architects Plus Zoning Group. The proposed upzoning for our village centers will lead to additional traffic and congestion. New construction will be catastrophic to local businesses. Larger chain stores will fill high-priced retail spaces. High density is not the answer. It does not promote affordability. Environmentally friendly buildings are the ones that are preserved, not torn down. These proposals will transform our garden city to an urban, denser one. Slow incremental change can avoid grave transformative change. We determined 1, 2, and 3 stories are village. Above that is urban. We should keep our village centers at 3 stories maximum. VC2 can be 3 stories and a half story by special permit. At 4.5 stories plus, we do not need VC3. The proposal includes 18 feet high first floor. The heights of first floors in our village centers is 15 feet and less. That's plenty. The proposed 18-foot height for a half story is way too high. 14 feet is high enough. We must make sure a half story remains maximum 2 stories of the floor area below. We recommend a setback of 12 feet for a flat ceiling half story, less visible from below, not the 7 feet proposed. The zoning text should include the MBTA Act requirement that the average unit size in developments be 1,000 square feet in area. In allowable uses, the attached townhouse unit type is missing and oversight and should be in there. The new MRT zone is no different than existing residences in Somerville with a 15 square foot footprints tight together. The MRT and VC1 zones have no minimum lot size. This needs to be rectified. No minimum lot size is the reason Somerville is the most densely populated city in New England. Both proposed dwelling types have setbacks that are tighter than existing. We constantly hear existing setbacks do not provide adequate space between properties. The minimum open space requirement is way too low at 30% and needs to be at least 50%. Preserve nature, don't overbuild. The VC1 dwelling type, 4,000 square feet, is out of scale with Newton. We recommend a footprint of 2,500 square feet. The two zone setbacks are not adequate for basic life safety. Access to the rear of properties by fire trucks require 15 foot.
Thank you,
That's
Mr. Hirschman. I'm
minimum.
sorry you're out of time.
So we urge the council to pause.
Sorry you're out of
incorporate these
time. You're out of
recommendations,
time.
and thank
Sorry.
you.
We have to end at 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, I guess we'll see if you're all still here. I'm going to the second page of folks who have signed up in the room. I'll read the first 5 names so you can get yourself ready. Mark Webster, Jerry Riley, Karen Bray, Lisa Monahan, Ron Blau. Please go ahead. Name and address.
Hello, my name is Mark Webster. I live at 15 Owatonna Street in Auburndale. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking the City Council, the Zoning and Planning Committee, the Planning Department, and all the other contributors for their hard work developing this proposal, including the many opportunities for citizen engagement over the past couple of years. When my wife and I first moved to Auburndale nearly 30 years ago, it was still relatively affordable. Our neighbors were a varied bunch, including many of modest means. But when their children were ready to find housing of their own, many were priced out of the market and had to leave Newton, even though they wished to stay. The proposed rezoning of the village centers offers the promise of bringing more affordable housing to Newton, making all Newton has to offer more available to everybody. Auburndale, in particular, has room for more housing and smart growth. We are fortunate to have both commuter rail service and the Green Line within walking distance, so not everybody needs a car. We would benefit from having a wider variety of shops in our village center to complement the great shops we already have. More local residents would help our businesses thrive. The plan for Auburndale is well thought out, with higher buildings allowed along the Pike and smaller ones along Com Ave. While I do have concerns about the bonus stories and whether they would result in buildings that are too high for our small village, these details can be reviewed and refined with input from the community. I urge the City Council to support the direction of this initiative and to continue to refine it. I look forward to enjoying greater vitality and variety in the village I love. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jerry Riley.
I'm Jerry Riley from 12 Spring Street in Upper Falls. And for those of you who, like me, love our village centers, and for those of you who want to protect our village centers and want to see them thrive, I'd like to point out one of the first things that was said in this meeting, and you might have missed it because it went back very quickly. In the first 30 seconds of the presentation, it was said that our current village centers could not be built under our current zoning today. Now, that's a pretty profound thing. All our village centers were built, 100 years ago. And since then, in the 1980s, I think, the zoning changed and sort of put in all these things in place that say what we have there now cannot be built by right. And if you think about every place that people love, whatever it might be, there was pictures of Brattleboro, lovely town. Northampton, say, or Newport, or any of these towns that have a feel and a vibe that people just are drawn to and they love. None of those places can be built under our current zoning. So our current zoning is broken, and I would urge you to support the rezoning. And in some ways, the rezoning is moving the zoning back much more to what it was like 100 years ago when these villages were built. And the one other thing I'm going to mention is somebody on the Zoom calls they posed the question, what percentage of the buildings in our villages today were required to have special permits when they were built? And the answer is just about none, because those were built by right back in the day when they were built. So anyway, that's all I have to say. The next speaker was Karen Bray, and she's gone home. So
Thank you very much. Then the next speaker is Lisa Monahan.
Hi, thanks very much. My name is Lisa Monahan. I live at 1105 Walnut Street in Newton Highlands. I've been a resident of Newton for 32 years. I'm an architect in a residential practice of primarily adaptive reuse and renovation work. I've also had quite a few years of experience in state and municipal planning. I'm a member of the Newton Buildings Professional Zoning Working Group and the Engine 6 Zoning Working Group, and have been for the last 2+ years. I've had the opportunity to follow along with the planning department and ZAP's work over the last few years, and I just want to say that I think that planning and UTIL and the ZAP committee have done a terrific job tackling a very complicated project with broad and high quality community input. The city has done a great job of integrating the goals developed for our village centers with the requirements of the MBTA communities law. Together, the proposal you're considering allows much needed additional housing types to fit into and around our village centers, incentivizes adaptive reuse and renovation of historic and existing housing stock, provides urgently needed climate-sensitive development tactics by concentrating housing and mixed-use development near transit in our villages. It provides opportunities for older adults who want to downsize but currently have no place to move to, either by moving to elevator buildings or making more units and more community in their current homes. The plan provides opportunities for younger families to move to Newton with zoning that will yield smaller, more attainable housing units close to transit and services. The care with which this plan has been put together is tremendous. The team has worked hard to balance providing opportunities with preservation of our beautiful housing stock and open space. Our city needs this kind of plan if it is to continue to endure as a vibrant city for generations to come. The zoning design conversation has been complicated, and it has raised fear and concern in some folks in the city about what would happen. Sometimes people's worst fears get exaggerated and unfortunately are voiced and or illustrated as misinformation. There have been illustrations put forth that distort views of proposed zoning and village streets and maps, including images of 8-story tall buildings. These have not been proposed or suggested. I urge the City Council to carefully look at the planning department team's prepared materials, the text, maps, 3D modeling. It is really good work. I'm very hopeful about the planning work here. I wish for more housing.
Thank you. I'm sorry you're out of time. But thank you very much. Submit your comments if you have more you'd like to say. Ron Blau, followed by Corey Alperstein speaking for Helena Brown.
Hi, my name is Ron Blau. I live on Wood End Road in Newton Highlands. Came here in 1983, so I've been here a while and seen changes. I want to speak more about the spirit of zoning reform than the specifics. The specifics I've read about seem really excellent, and I admire your patience and thoughtfulness in putting the proposals together. just the observation that for about the last 40 years in our country, the advantages, economic advantages and other advantages that go along with money have flowed upward. And I think those of us who are here are the beneficiaries of it, and other people have been kind of sacrificed. And when you have something, you want to hold on to it, and that leads to NIMBYism, and you build a fortress and you protect them with all sorts of legislation and also just habits of mind. And I think that a lot of people now, if I can catch the spirit, are resisting this and waking up to wanting to share more and to say, you know, we've had this fortress and it's time to open the gates wider and let other people in. And I think it's, you know, proceeding in that spirit. It's just fairer, and I think we want to share the benefits of living in this wonderful city with more people. That also fits in with climate goals. I'm very much interested in, you know, helping to save the climate, and with denser development and more public transportation, et cetera, I think that will help us reach our climate goals. So in any case, I'm all for what you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blau. Corey Alberstein speaking for Helena Brown, followed by Joshua Lewis.
Yes, good evening. I'm Corey Alberstein. I live at 19 Hibbard Road in Newton Corner, and I will be reading testimony that Helena Brown wanted to submit, but unfortunately she's in the Netherlands at the moment, and the time change would not allow.
Could you lower the mic a little bit so we hear you?
You okay?
Yep.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you hear all that?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to read Helena's comments and then just one or two of my own to add to it. Dear members of the City Council and fellow residents of Newton, my name is Helena Brown. I live at 56 Cloverdale Road in Newton Highlands. I am the chairperson of the Newton Citizens Commission on Energy. I made Newton my home almost 40 years ago. I strongly support the zoning reform proposal that is before us today. It is very rare to have a policy that simultaneously advances 3 priority objectives for our city. This zoning proposal does exactly that. It will invigorate the economic life of village centers. It will create conditions and incentives for badly needed medium and small size housing, and it will reduce energy use and greenhouse gas emissions per capita. What is there not to like? There are hardly any downsides to this zoning proposal. With density concentrated around the MBTA transportation nodes, it is likely to attract new residents who commute to Boston. And the combination of smaller sized dwellings and the new specialized stretch code will minimize the additional per capita greenhouse gas emissions. This will go a long way to neutralize the growing greenhouse gas emissions from the ever-increasing size of single and two-family construction in Newton. There's nothing radical about this proposal. Until 1987, the zoning code allowed 6-story buildings to be built by right in appropriate locations. Until the 1950s, that maximum height was 8 stories. I call for the City Council to adopt this proposal. So if I can take a couple more minutes for my own comments. I'm a member of the Newton Citizens Commission on Energy. I'm also a board member of Green Newton, and I'm also very involved with Gas Transition Allies, which has to do with retiring our gas infrastructure and shifting to retrofitted homes. We have a phenomenal housing stock in Newton that can be augmented and supplemented by new construction that is fossil fuel free. The most likely scenario for this is in village centers. I believe our future relies on our planning, and our planning requires change. Change is uncomfortable, and many people see themselves in the context of the past and the present, but it is our future we need to be most concerned about. 1 minute left, or I need to stop.
I'm sorry, but the rules as they're stated to me is each person gets 3 minutes regardless of whether they're speaking for someone else or for themselves. So I know you're a very good writer. Would you like to send in your
I will send
remainder
written
of your
testimony,
comments?
yes.
Okay.
Just my final comment is I fully support the zoning, the modest zoning proposal, and I hope it will go forward.
Okay,
Thank you.
very much. Okay, Joshua Lewis, followed by Zane Foster, Ari Zarin, Claire Sokoloff. Okay, is Joshua Lewis still here?
To be clear, I'm not Joshua Lewis, I'm Ari Zarin.
Okay. And Zane Foster is not here?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, we're then Ari Zarin, followed by Claire Sokoloff.
My name is Ari Zarin. I live on 301 Woodcliff Road in Newton Highlands. And the first thing I want to talk about is places where people actually want to live. I think that's something that has been a little bit eclipsed in this discussion today about a lot of kind of technical and financial elements. But this kind of zoning, this increased density, mixed use zoning, more accessible zoning, simply increases the happiness and health of people living in these communities. I know for one, as a young person, I just graduated from Newton South High School this year. It is really hard to get around Newton if you do not drive a car. Now, I thankfully have a driver's license and have a family that is fortunate enough to be able to give me regular access to an automobile. But I know that many of my peers, of which there are 4,000 over the 2 high schools, and you add middle schools to that, over the entire district, many of those students don't have access to cars, can't drive to various other metropolitan areas inside the state, and so they are dependent on bike transit, as I was for many years before I got my driver's license, and which I still use frequently because I have 5 drivers in my household, so in 2 cars, so we can't all be at the same place at the same time. So I want to strongly advocate for this kind of increased density, not because it's some kind of highfalutin like scheme or plan or anything, just because it's accessible and it makes people have a better life. And as I think of myself growing up, I don't want to raise a family in a place where I can't walk to a grocery store or walk to a restaurant regularly. I don't want to grow old in a place where I can't walk to a restaurant or walk to the local library. And so I think that kind of people first, on the ground, our lived experience first thinking is really important. And then to address the kind of larger issues, I don't see this zoning plan as something that's going to solve Massachusetts' various housing and transportation and climate change crises. It's a very modest proposal. I think that I would really like to see something much more significant in terms of zoning, but it is the first step. And I think we have to recognize that a good move, a move in the right direction, is better than not making a step forward, and certainly better than making a step backwards. And another thing to address is that I know there's some concerns about by right housing versus special permit process and the oversight like that. And just from my uncle's a real estate developer in Providence who actually used to work for the city of Newton in the zoning and planning department. And he talks a lot about how it's really difficult if you're a small developer versus if you're a giant corporation to go through the special permitting process. Just think about that when we're thinking about whether we're going to see large projects or smaller developers working in the city. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much. Okay, folks, I got to say the same thing to all of you. Just hold your applause. Claire Sokoloff, followed by Robert Gifford.
Good evening. I'm Claire Sokoloff. I live at 41 Oxford Road in Newton Center. As an over 30-year Newton resident, my kids and their friends are now the age I was when I came to Newton. What I'm seeing is that many would love to come home to enjoy the benefits of multi-generational living. Sadly, there are few homes young families can afford. So many of our kids are going to neighboring towns or even farther away towns with more attainable housing. I also see that friends who would like to downsize but either rent or still own their homes and stay in Newton have very few options, which is frustrating for them and also creates a bottleneck of available housing for the next generation. I worry that our school population will continue to decline if we continue on this trajectory, as housing options are limited due to the shortage of supply and prohibitive prices. The proposed VCOD zoning will result in increasing numbers of individuals and families of all ages who can come and live in Newton, and vibrant village centers where you can walk into town, shop for your clothing, shop for your groceries, go to the hardware store, maybe even go to the movies like we could do in Newton Center when we moved here. I applaud the council, the planning department, and all of the citizen activists who have worked so hard over the last few years collaborating to craft this exciting vision for our city. I urge you to vote in favor of the zoning plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire Sokoloff. Rob Gifford, followed by Nora Zilsberger.
Hi, Rob Gifford. I also live at 41 Oxford Road. About 20 years ago, the then Mayor David Cohen put out a call to form something called the Newton Center Task Force. And its objectives were very similar to what has been articulated here in terms of walkability, vibrancy of our village centers, more housing, more access to transit. And I excitedly raised my hand and joined the task force. And we had a lot of different people with different perspectives and different roles that really got to work. And we worked for a couple of years on this, and we got nowhere. I mean, it was a complete flame out. And the reason for that was we didn't have a framework. We didn't have a game plan. We didn't have an overall, structure within which to work. And as we went along, I must have said to myself 57 times, we need a village center overlay district or zoning. Even before I knew what that was, I just knew we needed something different to build upon. So over the past few weeks, I've sort of re-engaged with what you all have done and have gotten incredibly excited. And while I've been following it, I really sort of drilled in and looked at kind of the texture of each of the village centers in terms of different zones and different densities. And I just want to commend the planning department, the counselors who've been working on this, the planning board, all the volunteers, the incredible amount of public input that has gone into this. And I'm, a very enthusiastic supporter of this and what you're proposing. And if I could, I would take it and go back in my time machine back to 20 years ago and give it another try, but you can only move forward. So I really encourage you to, get this over the finish line, hold your ground on the issues of VC 321 and the densities you've designed. I think you've got it just right. And contrary to what some of the folks have said here, I think it's axiomatic that if you allow for, within reason, more density, you will lower the cost. It's just real estate economics. And so I think the thought that by going to a capping density at a lower level will somehow make housing more affordable, it's not going to happen. It's actually the reverse. So I think you've got it right. Stick to your guns. I think you've done a fantastic job here. And I thank you all and all the volunteers who've been so involved in this for what you've done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nora Zielsberger, Linda Wolk, Jay Cedrone, Barbara Glasman, Reverend Devlin Scott, in that order.
Hi, I'm Nora Zielsberger. I'm at 164 Linwood Ave, which is close to Newton-Anthem, but also closer to Newtonville. I've been here for 15 years, and I got here right when there was the housing crisis, and luckily came in because I love this city, and I would love for more people to be in it. I think what you've done with the proposal is amazing, and it fills all the requirements by the state with the new law that is so important for the housing and climate crises. I just wanted to thank you for that and encourage you to then go on after this gets done at the end of the year to then move on to the rest of Newton to allow for more multifamily housing, because I think that's also going to help overall for both of the housing and climate crises that I was referring to. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Linda Wolk, are you here? Jay Cedrone, are you here? Barbara Glazeman? Seeing none. Reverend Devlin Scott.
I'm Reverend Emily Scott, a resident in Newtonville / Nonantum. We're right on the border there. I live on Linwood Avenue, and my church, New City Church, is in Newton Highlands. Thank you for holding space for the tragedy that happened this past week. I hear now that we have someone in custody, and so I say the names in remembrance of those who lost their lives, Jill, Bruno, and Lucia. Personally, I'm interested in this process because I don't want our efforts of solving the problem to end up stalling the process. A lot of times, our intent to offer edits for the comfort and conveniences, for our comforts and conveniences, has the impact of allowing the burden to be carried on the shoulders of members in our society who are often crushed under the lack of affordable housing and accessibility, etc. Under those unfair burdens, edits to the process are fair, but let's keep them before us as opportunities without making obstacles for my neighbors whose approach have the impact that matches their intent. Thank you. As Newton's clergy of faith leaders and representatives of niche, the Newton Interfaith Clergy Association for Housing Equity, we have kept informed and participated in the zoning and planning work this year. We contributed as well to the community engagement process, and today our faith leads us to speak about a Newton that is inclusive and welcoming and just. We have come to see equality in society as a religious imperative as well as a civic imperative. Currently, our antiquated zoning, colored by historic redlining exclusions and disinvestments, has resulted in a serious outcome that needs to be responded to vigorously. Our pastors, our teachers, nurses, first responders, and other key members of the community cannot afford to live in Newton, where there is a mismatch between employment and housing. Those who work in Newton during the day should be able to sleep in Newton at night. Our seniors cannot find smaller homes. Our graduates must live outside Newton. Rents are unaffordable, and the average home price is $1.6 million. This is the result of housing that is not abundant, nor diverse, nor antiquated enough for those who are adequate enough for those who are very much part of our community. We advocate for that to change. We support you in your efforts to create a reformed zoning ordinance that allows families to live in Newton, that revitalizes our communities, and that welcomes people of diverse income, race, and faith. Housing is everything, so we offer this new prayer: yes, in God's backyard. Yes to changing the village centers, rezoning. Yes to Newton thriving. Yes to welcoming all who wants to live here. Yes to smaller homes, affordable apartments, and support to people on the margins. Thank you.
Wow, exactly on time. Thank you so much, Reverend. David and Anne Salant, are there two of you? Are either of you here? David or Anne Salant? No? Deborah Haller, please come up.
My name is Deborah Waller, and I live at 10 Bonner Circle for the last 30 years. As you're about to find out, I am the world's worst public speaker. Everything I'm going to say here tonight, however, will be posted on my website, newtonrezoning.org. Almost every
Excuse me, Ms. Waller. I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name. Please bring the mic down. If you could possibly speak a little slower.
Start again? Okay.
We'd hear you better. Yeah.
My name is Deborah Waller, and I have lived at 10 Bonner Circle for 30 years. As you're about to find out, I am the world's worst public speaker. Everything I'm going to say here tonight, however, will be posted on my website, newtonrezoning.org. Almost every quantitative thing the Mayor's Planning Department has said about the proposed rezoning is false. There's only 3 minutes, however, I'm going to concentrate on the biggest falsehood, and that is the representation that increased population density in Newton will increase housing affordability. This is false, and I can prove this falseness empirically with the statewide assessor evaluation data and the U.S. Census demographic data. I downloaded the MassGIS assessor data for every single municipality in Mass except Boston, which does not currently supply this data. I then calculated the residential land value per square mile for each location, with condo lands excluded because they also don't supply this data. Residential land per square mile varies dramatically across the state, with Monroe at $1 million per square mile and Somerville at $6.4 billion per square mile for residential land use. Newton ranks 7th between Arlington and Provincetown at $2 billion per square mile. Because of its very large size, however, Newton actually ranks #1 in the total value of its residential land for the entire state, excluding Boston. This means there's a lot of profit in driving up Newton's land values, and that's exactly what the proposed zoning will do. This rezoning will not create more affordable housing. It will only create profits for existing Newton landowners by driving up the price of land. I know this because, after looking at the statewide assessor data, I then looked at the U.S. Census demographic data for all Mass municipalities with greater than 5K residents. I did this to determine the key demographic drivers of land values. I found two main drivers in Massachusetts, except for the Cape. They didn't fit this model. Driver A was income density measured as total population income of a residential land area, and driver B was total number of households over residential land area. There were also some additional secondary drivers such as population age. I constructed two models, a rough model with just drivers A and B, and a finer model with more secondary drivers. In almost all cases, however, for Newton, an increase in population only increases land values and the total price of housing. This is not the case in less dense municipalities, but in the case of Newton, where land is already the most expensive housing component. If Newton really wants to supply more affordable housing, they should upzone the least dense parts of Newton, meaning Chestnut Hill and especially the Woodland Golf Course, which are totally eligible for multifamily rezoning under the MBTA Communities Act, rather than upzone the densest parts of Newton to satisfy the MBTA Communities Act. The rezoning is part of a greater trend in which laws are passed against middle-class interests based on unsupported promises, laws that only end up making the rich even richer. And again, please visit my website, newtonrezoning.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Waller. That's the end of the second sheet sign up. I'm going to go back online. We have enough time, I think, if I take an equal number of people online, to come back into the room one more time. I'm not taking questions. I'm supposed to give everyone equal time and balance it. So is there somebody behind the iPhone online, a person? Could you please, if you're there, please state your name and address.
Yeah, how are you? My name's Paul Fair. I live at Merton Street, Newton, Mass. No, I think it's a good.
I'm
Can
sorry.
you hear me?
Could you please say your last name more slowly?
Yeah, Fair.
Steve
So,
Fair. Okay.
yes. So I've lived here for probably, I don't know. My kids are the fourth generation. My grandfather built the house. I think it's a good idea, but the real issue I have is traffic. I mean, especially in Newton Corner. I'm going to talk to Allison about what they're thinking of doing in Maria. But the issue I have, I remember riding my unicycle across the bridge with the trolley tracks there, okay? And, I commute every day through the circle of death, and I'm not kidding you. It can take me 15 minutes to pull out of Grassmere Street to get to the set of lights where the Pike is. Now, if you're going to add more density there, what is it going to do to the traffic? And, you'll talk about green gases, this and that. Well, when I'm sitting in my truck for 15 minutes, I think that's using up a lot of fossil fuel. And it's the same with West Newton. Until we can solve parking and traffic, you really got to rethink about zoning. And, you can't say, well, you know what? And I see where this is going. Well, we'll just permit parking. And there's a lot of good ideas for and against it, but I really hope the board will actually look at everything closely and really consider about the fossil fuel and parking, because cars by 2030 will all have electric cars. Okay, I mean, plain and simple. Let's face it. So I think Newton is doing their part, but you really, really need to think about the traffic. I'm not kidding you. It's backed up to Oak Square some days all the way to get on the Pike. So if you can't do the infrastructure where you can have the streets wider where more traffic can go down, then, all you're doing is going to create nothing but a bottleneck. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is John Dundon and Julia Houston. If you are two separate voices, you each get 3 minutes, and followed by Russell Feldman. Ms. Houston or Mr. Dundon, are you there?
Yeah. Yes, we're here. Just John is going to speak.
Yeah, hi, it's John Dundon. We live at 71 Fordham Road in West Newton. The first thing I'd like to say is I really want to thank the planning department of the city of Newton, ZAP, Zoning and Planning Board, and also UTL for putting together what I consider the best imperfect plan that could possibly have been created. Nobody's going to be 100% satisfied, I don't think, but I think the amount of work that's gone into it, the revisions, rolling with the punches around MBTA communities to adapt was really a lot of hard work and a lot of very smart people working together to develop something that I think is really good for the city. I think about my own family and, you know, just different people that that would be affected by something like this. My parents are in their 80s. They live in Cambridge, but they could have just as well lived in Newton. And they had a 3,800 square foot home, and it was too big for them. And they had mobility issues. They wanted to downsize. There are a lot of people like that in Newton that are struggling right now to figure out, how do I stay near my family, my friends, my community, and live in an elevator building that allows me to live without without physical hardship. I also think about me growing up. I'm a child of divorce. My mother was a single mother with 2 children. She needed a 3-bedroom apartment. And we moved to Brookline and had good schools. There's no way, the way that real estate prices have changed, that we would have been able to afford living in Brookline or Newton on the middle income that we had. So I think that's a desperate need for Newton, is to have those types of housing choices. I think about my daughter, who lives in Philadelphia now because she she has a good job. She's an emergency department nurse, but she couldn't afford to live in Newton right now. So I would love to have her to at least have that option. I also think that, people talk about the 15-minute city. If you're going to have a 15-minute city where you can walk to everything, the people who work in that city have to have 15 minutes too, and they have to be able to afford to live there. So I think this zoning over time, over decades, will get us to hopefully a better place. And again, thanks a lot to UTL, ZAP, and the Planning Board for putting this program together. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dundon. Next is Russ Feldman, followed by Kathleen Coral-Grazer.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Russ Feldman. I live at 85 Langley Road in Newton Center. I've been a licensed architect in private practice for almost 50 years. For about 40 years, I've also taught architecture at the Boston Architectural College and worked with students in every school in the region at both the bachelor's and master's level of study. I'm speaking this evening on behalf of the building professionals, a small group of architects, developers, builders, and planners who've worked with the planning office on this zoning effort. We've reviewed the proposed text in detail and will submit a memo with our comments to the planning office and city council shortly. We look forward to discussing it with the planning staff. I'm here this evening to offer some general observations. First, we'd like to commend the council and the planning office both for a very serious and genuinely transparent effort. The council has provided us with well-conceived goals: village center revitalization, housing creation, preservation of our extraordinary architectural character, and leadership in sustainable development and construction. Communicating such a complex proposal to so many different people is always a challenge, and there remains much to do. We encourage both the city staff and its elected officials to continue to explain and to listen to all members of our community as they finalize this proposal. We offer 3 observations this evening. First, we support reducing parking requirements. We believe this change will reduce the cost of development and improve the physical organization of our village centers. This change lowers the floor of what's required. It does not require that the minimum be built. Developers want to build successful projects, and people won't rent or buy apartments or stores that don't have enough parking to serve their needs. Reducing the minimum allowed will promote efficiency in design and construction. Second, the MBTA Communities Act stipulates that we create 8,330 units of zoning capacity. That requirement has led to repeated calls for estimates of what the 100% build out of the zoning changes will be. This is asking the wrong question. Fears that whatever zoning allows will be built and built quickly are misplaced. To our knowledge, no city or town in America has ever reached its 100% zoning capacity. To repeat this, no city or town has ever reached their zoning capacity, period. People may have issues of genuine concern that need to be considered, but this isn't one of them. Finally, we believe this process represents an opportunity for rethinking zoning for several other areas besides those already proposed. We encourage you to consider the potential of existing village centers such as Nonantum and Newton Corner, and other places that have the potential to become village centers, such as those at Boston College, Woodland, and Riverside. Doing so can lead to a more equitable and economically vital city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Feldman. Next is Kathleen Curl-Grieser, followed by Sumuk Tendulkar.
Kathleen Curl-Grieser, 258 Mill Street, Newtonville. I'm going to read. Land is a precious resource, difficult to create, and likely to become less hospitable or to disappear as climate change makes temperatures and sea levels rise. It's not surprising that throughout history, people wanting power and wealth have tried to control land as much as possible. Wars are waged, genocide committed, and systems corrupted. Also, those with power and money can control more land. This is a global phenomenon. In desirable countries and cities from New York to London to Seoul, big capital is buying up land. If investors can control land and persuade politicians to upzone it for maximum profit extraction, big capital can effectively control housing markets, making the goal of owning a home and land unattainable for most people, while profiting from an endless stream of rental income. These investors will always try to externalize their costs onto other taxpayers. Campaign contributions to keep cooperative politicians in office and to defeat citizen referenda are peanuts compared to the profits investors can make by upzoning us out of our homes. Because upzoning leads to gentrification, displacement of current residents, rising housing prices, demolitions, tree and green space loss, and because densification equals profits for the investor corporate landlord class. There was perhaps a time when our elected representatives understood they were supposed to represent the interests of us, their constituents, and when helping people climb out of poverty and into financial security through owning a house and a backyard was seen as a progressive thing to do. It is the opposite of democracy when our elected representatives are advancing the profit interests of big capital over the modest hopes of their not wealthy constituents. It is cynical and cruel to imply that the family that owns an ordinary Cape or Colonial are the oppressors who are keeping others from finding a home they can afford, that their backyard is more than they deserve, and that the demands of environment, equity, and affordability require that they should be displaced from the community they helped to build so a wealthy investor group can buy up their property, demolish their house, and cram as many rental units onto the space as possible, ensuring a total transfer of land, money, and power to the wealthiest elites. Many of us are weary from seeing our tax dollars pay for expensive consultants and planning staff uninterested in the preferences of many Newton residents. The disinformation, engagement being peddled to us, and the coercive power of the state being used against municipalities in the Commonwealth and against certain parts of Newton by this administration and its majority on the council. I urge every one of you to vote down the Village Center upzoning, lobby DHCD for more favorable ways of meeting only the number of units required by the MBTA Communities Act and no more. And I urge Newton voters to vote out any Newton elected official who supports any upzoning in Newton beyond the minimum required by the state. Finally, our elected representatives may think their houses are safe or that they can always retreat to their second homes.
You're out of time, Ms. Grieser.
But those big investors might want that land too.
You may submit your comments in writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sumuk Tendulkar, followed by Julian Goldman, John Cantor, Alice Ingerson, Jason Harberger.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Sumuk Tendulkar. Live at 137 Anawan Road. I'm also a member of Woburn Area Council, but today I'm speaking in a personal capacity. I want to speak specifically about development that does not count towards Newton's requirement of 8,330 units set by the MBTA Communities Act. As we know, these are buildings in Newton Corner, Nonantum, Auburndale, Lower Falls, Upper Falls, Four Corners, and Thompsonville. These are also buildings in the village centers that have the thick black line on the map and are designated priority streets. I'm here to request to mark these sites for development, but only through special permitting process and not by right as currently proposed. As we know, we have a list of schools that are in dire need of repairs and roads that are way beyond the spot patching. Also to note is the residents' voice, which was displayed in the library last summer. They said they needed more gathering spaces, more public art, and more facilities in the villages. Obviously, operating override is one, although uncertain way to secure more taxes. We should also look at securing more revenue and amenities through special permit process. Look at the Northland, who contributed more than $1 million towards countryside, or to other developments where updating parks or spaces have been provided. These developers funded amenities means money from city can be used for better schools, roads, or other improvements. Money is fungible. There is a huge amount of monetary value that is proposed to be getting created, something to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $1 billion in property value. It is only fair to ask for a small investment into the city, which desperately needs more tax revenue from developers or owners of this property. This is possible as a part of negotiation that results from special permit process. Furthermore, rezoning targeting 8 to 10,000 more units, we have opportunity to take time and do this correctly instead of rushing into a buy right solution. Consequently, I sincerely request you to remove the buy right option for the specific development beyond the 8,330 and instead subject non-MBTA counted development to Newton's special permit process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tendulkar. Julian Goldman is next.
Hi. Thank you very much. My name is Julian Goldman. I live at 57 Everett Street. Our family bought our house here over 20 years ago. We moved here after an extensive neighborhood search and have been thrilled with our neighborhood and our neighbors. We value the safety, the centrally located Newton Center green space, restaurants and shops, and access to the T, well, especially when it functioned better. Zach's presentation tonight was excellent, and it helped to clarify a great deal of the zoning initiative, which I had found obscure despite reading all of the online documents. However, it's still unclear how the proposed zoning will affect this immediate Newton Center area. For example, and this has been mentioned by others, traffic flow concerns. What will be the impact of the zoning change on local traffic flow and the safety of pedestrians, especially the elderly and children? Waze has redirected traffic along Everett and Sumner Streets. The volume is already hazardous. Our neighbor was almost hit by a racing car just a few weeks ago. What will be the effect of limiting or not requiring street parking? How would the envisioned new residents seeking affordable housing travel locally and regionally? How will they commute? How will the new plan anticipate and align with emerging autonomous and semi-autonomous electric vehicles, especially taxis, that are likely to become commonplace due to recent national legislation and initiatives? Where will these vehicles travel, charge their batteries, and self-park? And consider that electric vehicles are likely to be reimagined into small, last-mile personal people movers, not e-bikes, that are seen by many as less suitable for local travel. It is optimistic that the new zoning will create safe walkways, bikeways, and maintain high-quality green space without an intentional focus on these needs. Losing Newton Center's open space would be a tragedy. Currently, it isn't uncommon for sidewalks and road hazards, potholes, to be unaddressed by the city for many years due to practical concerns. These uncontroversial maintainability issues should be addressed in the context of the new zoning plan. It's easy to say that the T is the answer. Well, we moved to Newton Center in part for access to the T, but as the T currently exists, it can't be depended upon to support the zoning vision for commuting and local travel. It's curious to me, not an expert, that our city must respond to a Commonwealth mandate related to mass transit, while there does not seem to be a commensurate, demonstrable commitment to improving the performance of the T. And by the way, when we moved here, we had to stop family bicycling because it was just too dangerous for teenagers to bike on Newton streets. Hopefully my comments will encourage refinement of the zoning plan. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, sir. Next is John Cantor, followed by Alice Ingerson.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Cantor. I live at 672 Chestnut Street in Woburn. Special thanks again to the Planning Department for another outstanding presentation, and thanks to Chair Crossley and the City Council for providing the opportunity for this discussion and the courage and patience to deal with the zoning topic. I have been an active volunteer in our community for the last 15 years as a member of the DRC, the Energy Commission, the Green Newton Building Standards Committee, and more recently, the Zoning Redesign Building Professionals Working Group. I've never witnessed a more thorough, thoughtful, and transparent process, including so many stakeholders, but most importantly, the residents of Newton. The impressive zoning redesign effort will help us meet our immediate needs, diversifying housing options, simplifying the building permit process, enhancing the vibrancy of village centers, reducing car dependency, and increasing walkability. Most importantly, this zoning effort and the village center overlay districts represent a major effort to deal with the climate crisis. It allows for more housing without cutting down forests, higher capita per acre, less need for cars, and more businesses and customers. It enables more people to live near all their life needs, including transportation to work. It encourages preservation of existing homes, smaller homes with less carbon impact. I urge the council to complete the zoning redesign process and approve the current zoning proposal substantially as it is. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cantor. I have to say that it seems to me some of these squares are moving around, but I'm going to keep the order I wrote down the first time I looked. So that's Alice Ingerson is next, Jason Harberger following Alice, and then Stephen Farrell is the 10th speaker. Then I'm going to bring it back into the room.
My name is Alice Ingerson. I live at 1923 Beacon Street in Woburn in a small house that is halfway between the Woburn and Woodland T stops. Over our 31 years here, we raised 2 children who attended Newton Public Schools from kindergarten through high school while owning one car, only one car. So it can be done. In the 1950s, Newton adopted residential zoning rules that are mostly still in force. At that time, we aimed to attract mostly affluent new residents who wanted to drive from large homes and large lots to shops and services outside their neighborhoods. As a result, in much of Newton, our current zoning only allows large, expensive single-family homes to be built by right, either from scratch or by enlarging an existing house, in neighborhoods with no land use other than housing. But as a community, our goals have now shifted toward allowing families with a wider range of incomes to live here, helping Newton residents drive less and reduce Newton's contribution to climate change, and adapting Newton's existing buildings and development patterns to achieve these goals. So how could we do this? And I think you'll recognize the current rezoning proposal does a lot of this. Families with a wider range of incomes could live in Newton if we had more smaller homes, homes that use less land, and homes near public transit and amenities like shops. Newton residents could drive less, use less energy, and combat climate change more effectively if they had the opportunity to live in smaller homes, homes that use less land, and homes near transit and amenities. Many of Newton's oldest neighborhoods, which developed before zoning, have smaller homes, homes that use less land, and are centered around transit and amenities. There's a clear pattern here. The same basic policies and places in our community can help us meet many of our current goals, and the currently proposed village center and MBTA zoning recognizes this by incentivizing multifamily buildings that are with units that are hard to enlarge, keeping them more affordable over time, in locations where people can put toward a home the money they could save by not owning a second or third car. I just also like to note that some critics of the proposed new zoning would like to see more income restricted all affordable housing by nonprofit organizations in Newton, perhaps by allocating a higher proportion of Newton's CPA funds to housing. As the former staff person of our CPA program, I totally support that idea. However, if we use our current CPA funding, the maximum possible for housing, given Newton's current real estate values, we could buy for affordable housing maybe 2 acres a year if that land were for sale at all. So I think until the state and federal governments commit major additional funding for housing, we need not only more CPA funds for housing, but also zoning that encourages modestly sized, relatively affordable units without income restrictions or public subsidies in appropriate locations. And that's what I think the new zoning aims to do.
Thank you.
So I hope you'll support it.
Thank you very much. Jason Harberger, I see you still. I had you next.
Yep, thank you. I had a Zoom issue. My hand went up and down, so thank you. Hello, Jason Harberger at 15 Perkins Street in West Newton, a 9-year resident, member of Engine 6, and speaking on my behalf here. So first, thank you to the city, ZAP, and the planning board for your collaboration and community engagement in this process. And thank you to every city councilor. I've had kind of disagreement on policy issues with some councilors over the years, and I have to say every councilor I've interacted with has been enthusiastic, committed, and had their heart in a great place. So coming from that statement, I'd like to reference 2 sentences published in the White House in June of 2021. They are common examples of exclusionary zoning include minimum lot size requirements, minimum square footage requirements, prohibitions on multifamily homes, and limits on the height of buildings. And it goes on to say, second sentence, some zoning laws have been used to discriminate against people of color and to maintain property prices in suburban and more recently urban neighborhoods. So some, no longer quoting the White House, some economists refer to overly restrictive zoning practices as opportunity hoarding. In other words, when residents can afford to live in an expensive city, enjoy its parks and schools, and then vote to slow the growth of new housing that can include smaller and less costly units. I view the overlay zoning proposal as significant progress to make room for more new neighbors, to share the opportunity of living in Newton through more multifamily homes, more diversity in housing options, and more walkable, bustling village centers. I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. And finally, online, Stephen Farrell, and then I'm going to go back to the room.
Thank you, Chair Crosley. I am Stephen Farrell. I live at 30 Winston Road in Newton Center. I fully support rezoning for the village centers, but not the current plan. Rather than a longer statement on complimenting or challenging prior comments, I will address 4 of many unnoted but concerning issues in the form of questions and hope to hear your responses soon, but not tonight. This is an extraordinarily complicated project, and you have spent more than 2 years to reach this stage. Given that you must have the plan to the state by December 31st, and presumably prepared much earlier given that deadline, will you commit to having a very well-defined, nearly complete plan available by October 1st at the latest that you can and will immediately share with all voters before the November 7th elections? And if not, why not? 2, what are the possible penalties to Newton should the plan not be presented on time, or should we decide not to participate at all? Is it true that one of the possibilities is the loss of $75 million for 3 MBTA stations intended to make those stations accessible for residents with disabilities? I hope not. Number 3, will the priority streets designated to ensure commercial opportunities on the first floors in the village centers be excluded from by right development since they are not allowed by the MBTA law? If not, why not? And 4, given the stated goal of ensuring the success of small businesses in the village centers, will your plan require developers to guarantee that current businesses will be provided similar and appropriate interim space at current rents to continue their businesses during construction? For instance, virtually every small long-time business along Lincoln Street in Newton Highlands is certain that they will not survive closure for 2 or more years. We look forward to hearing your answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Okay, I have a partial sheet left for folks who've signed up who are in the room if you're still here. First person on the list is Lizbeth Heyer. I see you're here. And Scott Wyman, I'm sorry, Nagel is after that, then Sean Roach. Good evening, please go
Good
ahead.
evening. My name is Lisbeth Heyer. I live at 25 Freeman Street in Auburndale, and I am speaking tonight both personal perspective, my tremendous support for this proposal, but also on behalf of the Newton Housing Partnership, which I chair. I want to thank all of you for the opportunity tonight to comment on this important proposal. And on behalf of the partnership, we appreciate your leadership and your commitment to modifying our zoning code to diversify and expand housing options, including housing that is more affordable and accessible than most options currently available in Newton. It has been 50 years since the original version of Chapter 40B was passed by the state legislature, yet Newton has yet to reach its 10%. We clearly need to do more. The zoning changes being contemplated in the Village Center overlay maps and associated allowances and design guidelines will create more contextual, as-of-right, multifamily development opportunities in locations that offer greater and more equitable social and economic opportunities for low and middle income households. The scale and diversity of apartment types this will facilitate will inherently provide the opportunity for a lower price point and help shift the radical imbalance in supply and demand, which is a regional crisis that has driven up housing costs well beyond what most working families and retired people can afford. New as-of-right options in our villages will also contribute to compliance, as many have talked about tonight, with the state's MBTA Communities Act. This is an important step in addressing the housing crisis that the state and the region faces in the same thoughtful way as is being contemplated here with Newton's own zoning reform. The proposed village center zones will make it possible for more people to afford housing near transportation and services, and ultimately support the sustainability and viability of our workforce, which is the backbone of our economy. Finally, I want to end by saying that the partnership strongly encourages you to adopt by right density bonuses for 1 and 2 stories to developers in return for higher than standard levels of affordability required under Newton's inclusionary zoning bylaw. Reducing the need for special permits in these designated districts will make the expensive and risky process of developing subsidized housing more feasible and ultimately encourage more deed-restricted affordable developments at scale, which is the quickest and most effective way to expand affordable housing options in Newton. This is particularly important for our low and extremely low-income households that need subsidy to achieve affordability. I know there's been a lot of back and forth about the viability of these density bonuses, and I don't want to take time tonight to get into detail on that, but just simply to say that affordable housing development isn't a one-size-fits-all proposition, and this tool is extremely important for development with subsidies.
You are out of time. Is that
Thank
it?
you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't get my mic on quick enough. Thank you, Scott Wyman Nagel. Are you here? Okay. Sean Roach, you're next. Daniel Herring, are you here? You would follow Sean if you're here. Shagit Steiner, are you here? No. We might get through the whole list. Irino, is she here? Oh, please queue up then. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Roach.
Sean Roach. I live at 42 Daniel Street in a home that is family friendly, that was built by profit-driven developers. What a night. Change is hard. The proposed zoning is going to change Newton. I happen to welcome that change. Not everyone will, I get it, but this change is necessary. We live in a city with a split personality. We are a community with 10 transit stations, and our zoning has created auto-centric development. Rules primarily written in the first half of the 20th century have, intentionally or not, failed us in the 21st century. We have some of the lowest housing density around transit in the Commonwealth, pathetically low, crippling the opportunity for Newton's transit assets to contribute to climate action. At the same time, the village centers themselves attract people who want to live car light. Look at Newtonville. This is an incredibly important point. People keep saying, The transit's no good in Newtonville, and yet in the last 2 years, the folks who live at Trio and at Austin Street have had historically low or surprising levels of car ownership. Why? Because the village centers themselves serve needs that reduce the need for cars. The combination of the 20th century rules and early 21st century demand for housing have conspired to drive teardowns and create housing stock that has exacerbated economic inequality and reduced economic diversity in the city. Under our existing zoning, we are becoming a city of more and more huge homes that are affordable to very few. Even our smaller homes are becoming unattainable to most. And all this huge housing requires and/or promotes automobile travel. We are not getting the housing we want or need. Finally, these rules, intentionally or not, have had the effect of creating or exacerbating racial segregation. I support these proposed changes. I love the thoughtful work that the planning department and others have done. I don't entirely love the proposed changes. Principally, we should have the by right ability to build small apartment buildings outside the commercial districts. We need to make it possible to build standard New England building types, triplexes, fourplexes, and sixplexes. I think I understand what's driving this, optimizing to prevent residential redevelopment, which is why the height that some folks don't like is in the commercial districts. That's the trade-off. While I, like just about everyone in the room, may be disappointed by some aspects of the proposed plan, I wholeheartedly support the changes with the following thoughts, and I'm out of time.
You are.
I'll put them in writing.
Thank you so much. We may have time for one more speaker. I am obliged to stop the public hearing at 10:15. And again, I did bring this up at the beginning of the meeting, that we will be continuing the public hearing. There's a long list of people, both online and here, who would like to speak, and never mind those who went home because it got too late. So Shagit Steiner, please.
Hi, my name is Hagit Steiner, and I am at 48 Woodward Street, and I've been a Newton resident for 16 years, and I will keep it very brief. I am in full support of this zoning redesign. I am very concerned about the future of Newton and the goals of trying to keep it affordable, which it's not. Thinking about the future of the climate and the crisis we are in. I think this is a step in the right direction, and by creating more affordable housing, more concentrated housing in the village centers, accessible to our sometimes not so great but also the accessibility to public transportation, which is needed also for our climate crisis. So I am in full support. Thank you, everybody, for all your hard work on this, and I hope that this goes forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Steiner. So, again, as I said, I feel like I have to say this a few times, because we did set a time at the beginning of the meeting to stop. I'm sorry. This is what the open meeting law allows us to do, and we do need to bring it into committee. We are holding the public hearing open through the summer and into September. We are not voting on this. We are working through the summer to refine, to listen to what you have to say. You can write to us. You can call us. You can email us. I'm sorry, I can't have a conversation. I have strict rules that are given to us by the law department, and this is what we need to do. I wanted to bring it back into committee for a brief period of time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We will, in the committee, we will discuss whether we want to continue hearing from the public during our 2 July meetings for a period of time. It would be shorter, but we might be able to do that as well. There's a lot of people not around during the summer, but the 2 meetings are scheduled for, tell me if I'm right, Jacqueline, July 24th and July 31st. Okay, that's what we have so far. not meeting again till July 24th. Again, please feel free to write us. We read everything you send us, and we catalog it for everybody else to read in the Friday packet as well. But if you want to hear answers to any of the questions that you asked during the evening, this is for folks online as well, asking Jen Kyra to briefly summarize some of the common questions or clarifications that are necessary as a result of what we heard tonight. So I'm gonna give it to Ms. Kyra, and then we'll end with a discussion of where we go from here over the summer and into the fall. Ms. Kyra?
Madam Chair, are the members of the committee going to have a chance to?
I'm sorry.
Are we going to have a chance to talk about this a bit?
I really wanted to talk about process.
Well,
tonight.
I want to, Ms. Kyra is doing a summary. I think the members of the committee ought to be able to offer some questions if this process is going forward. I'm certain she's going to do an excellent.
Questions are, I believe, acceptable, but I think we don't want to really deliberate on what we've heard tonight until we meet in July.
Well, I'm not going to be here until the 31st, so I just want to have a chance to weigh in a bit. So
Okay,
that's it.
I'm going to call on Ms. Kyra first, and I hope people will stick around for this. Ms. Kyra, are you all set, or do you want me to? You know what you're doing. Okay, thank you,
Madam Chair. I just have a few things that came up that I did want to clarify, and I'm sure there's many questions I missed that we're likely to get into in further discussion over the next few months. But if there's anything else I did miss that seems pressing, just let me know. So parking came up a number of times, and I think some members did mention this, but we are seeing people living with less than one car per unit in recent multifamily development. So people may not be taking transit for every single trip, but they are able to live with fewer cars, which is the goal. I heard concern about churches being torn down due to the rezoning. So this is something we have been discussing and thinking about a good bit, as we know many churches, congregations have been dwindling, and they are looking for options. Under our current zoning, churches could redevelop. There's nothing stopping that. However, under the new zoning, in general, what's being proposed for those sites is less than what's already there. So many churches are already larger than what the new zoning would allow. The advantage to the zoning for churches is that it gives more flexibility for reuse of those spaces, whether it's for the entire building or a portion of it. We see today a real challenge when a congregation doesn't need as much space and would like to bring in other uses to supplement income, but run into all sorts of zoning hurdles. So this zoning would make that process much easier for churches, so making it easier to preserve and reuse those buildings. There was some concern about losing out on amenities that get negotiated as part of the special permit process as part of by right development. So there's a couple things I wanted to clarify here. One is that larger projects will still go through the special permit process. Anything on a site over 30,000 square feet, which is less than 3/4 of an acre, will be required to get a special permit. Anything over 20,000 square feet will be required to go through site plan review. So there is still the same opportunities that we have today through that process. Additionally, many of those amenities that are included as part of the special permit process come from a required payment for new development called the inflow and infiltration payment. It's based on the size of the project, is required for all new development, I think over 4 housing units, and will apply to by right development. Now, the Commissioner of Public Works can waive up to 75% of that payment to going towards the actual I&I project to put it towards other infrastructure improvements. So this is what is happening as part of the special permit process today. That is often the sort of fund that the City Council is looking at and directing towards other improvements in the area or amenities. That will still exist. That fund will still exist, and the city council will still have full discretion over where that money goes. I think that's the main ones that I had that I wanted to clarify. Were there others that?
I think a couple people, again, mentioned the historic preservation of either landmark or district properties. And just to say again, we're not including any districts, but properties that are significant within our village centers either are landmarked or are worthy of that. So this applies to the churches also. Could you speak to that?
Correct. So we did exclude anything in a local historic district. And anything that is landmarked will have to go through the current process. For any changes to a building that is landmarked must be approved by the Newton Historical Commission. Demolition delay still applies. So anyone looking to demolish a portion or all of a building will trigger demolition delay review with the Newton Historical Commission, which often puts on a 12 to 18-month delay, during which time significant buildings can and often do get nominated as landmarks. Buildings on the National Register still will need historic review for character-defining changes. So the historic preservation protections we have in place today will continue to exist. One other thing is there was mention of losing open space. I think someone particularly mentioned losing open space in Newton Center. We're not including any city-owned properties. No parks, no city-owned parcels are included as part of this proposal. This is purely private property and will not remove any existing open spaces or parks.
Thank you for those clarifications. Does the committee have any further clarifications that it believes we should be adding to this? Councilor Baker?
My question is just about our process going forward. I have some individual clarifications, but I want to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing in committee with this information and how we do it.
Okay, can we get to that as, if anybody has more content-oriented clarifications, and then we'll talk about process immediately afterward.
Thank you.
Councilor Leary?
One member of the public spoke about earmarking affordable housing units for civil servants and teachers and such. And I just wanted to clarify, I understand the spirit of that, but I believe that's not legal under fair housing law. So I just wanted to make that statement.
Thank you. Ms. Kyra, can you speak to that issue for us?
Yeah, I believe that's correct. We do have a local preference of, I believe, 25%, which does give some preference to those who currently live or work or go to school in Newton. But we do not earmark any affordable housing units outside of that.
Okay, anything else?
I just wanted to comment, Madam Chair, that I was very impressed with the content of the public comments tonight. I think it kind of goes to that the planning department, the city, and the outreach that's been done has been quite effective, because as was mentioned, it's a very complex topic, yet people spoke very eloquently about many details. So I think a lot of people are paying attention, and I was happy to hear that, and I look forward to more public comment later.
Thank you. Anyone else on the committee?
I actually have a substantive question, I guess.
Okay, please go ahead.
There have been some concerns raised in other situations about the risk of what you might call investment properties as opposed to ownership properties. Part of the value of the current arrangements in the city is that a large contingency of the population own their properties. There are some tenants, but the question, I guess, is that we've heard anecdotal evidence, and I don't know how true it is elsewhere, that some of these properties that have been bought in other communities and developed and basically become short-term ownership, and we have an Airbnb ordinance, of our own. But I want to try and ask the planning department to reflect on the idea of how do we maximize the chance of the rental properties actually being long-term rentals, or at least not short-term. because it seems to me that's part of the objective that we have in mind, not just to sort of compete with the hotel industry. We've got some safeguards, but this is a different arrangement, and I think it's important to reflect on how that works and how it could work better if we needed it. So that's one dimension. I hope that the committee.
Can you speak to that, Ms. Kyra?
You don't have to do it now, but yeah.
No, I think these questions, if you can.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I do think it's worth going back and taking a close look at our short-term rental ordinance and how it compares to what we're proposing here, and talking with the law department about what other options there are if we do decide that this is a concern or becomes an issue. Because I think we all have the same goal of creating more long-term units, not more short-term units.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on the committee have a point of clarification, or on the planning board you think needs to be raised this evening?
I have one other one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilor Baker.
One of the comments we heard that I guess I'd like the department to reflect on is the degree of the half-story idea. You know, there's been some argument that the amount of setback that creates a half-story opportunity is too shallow for effective change in the visual streetscape, especially if you're on the other side of the half story. And so I'm not sure exactly how this plays out, but I'd like to ask the department to reflect a little bit on that question. Okay.
Okay, that's something I think we could take up in our discussions in July. Worth putting on the list. Okay, thank you. Anything
Madam
else?
Chair, could I ask, it's Councilor Krinsman.
Oh, Councilor Krinsman. Yes, please go ahead.
We heard a number of comments tonight about the fact that the proposal exceeds the required housing threshold, you know, by a number of housing units. And I think it might be helpful to get some material or explanation from the department, sort of about the tools that they're using, the number of factors that go into the calculation for how many units, and perhaps an explanation of the fact that it's not necessarily a precise, you know, calculation that gets us to exactly 8,301 units, or that we could do that without potentially infringing on some of those factors, or you know, unfairly implementing them in one part of the city over another.
Thank you. It's my understanding the department has come out or is coming out with an FAQ. Is this something that can be written up simply? I know we've talked about it a number of times, but there is a lot of confusion. It's clear a lot of people are asking about, you know, what these numbers mean.
Yeah, so we do have an FAQ that's on our website that we also sent out in our newsletter today. So essentially, the tools we're required to use from the state are calculating an absolute maximum. They are nowhere near a realistic build out. They're assuming no parking spaces. They're assuming everything gets maxed out. There's many assumptions built into that may not often reflect our reality here. That said, we need to show that we're meeting that number, but what is driving this effort is what's best for village centers. And that's providing more housing at more price points, more affordable housing, more support for local businesses. So we think the focus should be not just on exactly hitting this number set by the state, using a tool that isn't an actual build-out tool, but really looking at the areas within the village centers and the surrounding neighborhoods and thinking about what is appropriate and what's best long-term for Newton.
Thank you. I guess we can all take a look at the FAQ and see how we might use that, and whether we want any more clarification than that. Councilor Krinsman, is there something else?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. That was my only point. I just think that the number is out there. People are appropriately or inappropriately focused on the number or thinking about the number. And so I just think it's worth, you know, putting together some materials that talk about the number and talk about, you know, why our zoning proposal will have to allow for potential housing units in excess of that number, and why we're doing that. I think Ms. Kyra has talked about that, but I do think it would be helpful, particularly in response to that question. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. I see Councilor Wright, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Following up with Councilor Krinsman, I would be interested in a little bit more, and I can do it offline, the details on those numbers, because I along with Councilor John Oliver, we're calculating going by village, and I'm coming pretty close to your numbers. One thing, though, I want to clarify, that 8,330 number is artificial, but it is not a max, because that is using 1,000 square feet. And our zoning is zoning for a maximum volume of a building, and using the state building code, that number is a lot smaller. And it doesn't include a lot of other things in there. I have one other question, which in the last presentation last week, you've changed at least one, if not more, of the heights, and it's not what's in the proposed zoning. So there's some changes being made in the presentations that's not reflected in our zoning. So I was wondering when the next update, and if there were any other changes you made in the presentations from what is in the proposed zoning, the latest proposed zoning.
Yeah, that's a great question. We did lower the overall height for MRT in the presentation, and that's based on the conversations we've had at the last few ZAP meetings. There seemed to be agreement that we didn't need the taller ground floor because we're not allowing for commercial uses, and that height could come down a bit. So we did lower that in the presentation. The intent is to carry that through in the zoning in the next update. I think we're planning on issuing an updated version in September, after we spend the summer really taking into account the discussions and comments here tonight, further discussions in committee, and further legal review and internal review and refinement.
Okay, and there was no other additional changes besides that?
I don't think so.
Okay, and I know, yes, I think we all agreed, and I agreed that it should be lowered, but we never discussed a number. So, and that was something I would like to have discussed more in our meetings, and not just have a number thrown out there. I have some other issues in that, but I'm going to just take it offline. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And again, our July meetings on the 24th and the 31st. We have minimal other business to take care of, but mostly those meetings are for us in committee to go through the ordinance and discuss for hopefully close to a final time many of the unsettled issues and or matters that so much noise outside. I don't know why they're working outside City Hall tonight. And issues where there's maybe some lack of clarity. I think we also will discuss that FAQ and make sure it's everything we need to help clarify, first and foremost, what this is. So that's our 2 July meetings. At the moment, we have not scheduled a meeting for August. Thinking staff could maybe use some time without us to do a lot of this work. If we feel we need a 3rd meeting in the summer, we'll talk about that and see how far we get in the first 2 meetings. And come back and have a couple meetings in September where we offer more time for the public to speak, as we earlier discussed. Councilor Baker.
So, Madam Chair, my concern, as I indicated, I have a conflict on the 24th. I can be here on the 31st, but my schedule shouldn't drive the process. But I do think we need time in committee to talk about these things. Having the comments from the public is helpful and may shape our It seems that the Public Works Department is acting in a, maybe they're doing sewer work of some sort.
I know, they're working on the street. Had to be tonight. Please go ahead.
So we've really not had a chance. We've had presentations by the department and and I know the department's advocates for this, but we really haven't had a chance to talk about in committee some of the basic concepts and decide whether we agree with them. So, for example, the parking, doing away with the parking minimum is something I'm not yet ready to support, but we haven't really made it in a final decision. We've had the recommendation from our consultant and the department in that regard. What Councilor Krinsman alluded to is that in a curious way, we're trying to comply with the MBTA Communities Act as well as continue with what we've been doing on the village centers, as opposed to saying, okay, what is the net need we have to comply with the state? Do we need as much of the activity in the center now as we did before because we now got the MBTA Communities Act? Or what is in fact really the exposure for the city if we don't pass it? I know the Attorney General has written her advisory, but that's a very different question, it seems to me, than a judicial decision that says we have to do this. I don't want to get into an argument about that. I think there's a question about it that's still outstanding in terms of what the city's obligation is. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it as a matter of prudence, but I do think that part of the question we're being asked by the public is, do we have to do as much as being proposed? And if so, if not, where do we make adjustments? Do we make adjustments in height? Do we make adjustments by adding parking requirements? Can we have larger setbacks? Are there other elements that are worth thinking about that we would prefer in order to get to a better outcome in terms of the actual development? And then there is just the general question, not about the specifics, and you've got the zoning ordinance itself to go through, to think through exactly how we're going to vote this. Is this going to be a package entire where we have these two docket items? Are we going to have amendments that can be offered in committee and then perhaps, if not successful, offered on the council floor? The process, this is a major change, obviously, as we all know, but it is, we really need to be clear and thoughtful about how all of this goes forward, because there are elements in it that some people might support and others that might not, but we need to be clear about what those elements are and what our opportunities are to affect those. So that's part of the concern I have about our process going forward. I think that in my experience over the years, when we've dealt with zoning ordinances, we've dealt with them with the opportunity for members of the committee and ultimately the council to offer amendments if they think they're in the public interest, and the committee votes on them and the council votes on them and we decide what to do. But I don't think we've ever had a situation where we had to adopt something entire, other than the recodification where we worked through very carefully what the elements of that were. So.
Okay, I agree with you that we need to be thoughtful and careful about how we move ahead with this proposal that we've had. That has been evolving over more than 2 years. My thinking was that in the summer meetings, we would begin to go through the ordinance itself and have the conversations about its elements as we proceed, and take straw votes in the committee to the point where, we've covered everything in committee. Amendments are always, accepted, and we can take amendments to the, what are we taking a straw vote on? Heights, mapping, whatever. And then we will move it into the council at some point, hopefully by, I don't know, late October, early November. And we'll have several meetings in the council within which we may take further amendments.
Well, I guess
as far as the how it gets voted, I believe the law department is considering this right now. One point of view from our consultants, and that I hear from the state, but I'm going to wait for the law department to rule or to opine on it anyway, is that anything that, any land use decision or zoning decision that furthers housing opportunity or development is subject to the simple majority vote by the Housing Choice Act. But I'm not sure, I don't know if there's anything in this proposal that for any reason needs to be peeled out separately because it's not about housing. There's probably a discussion to be had around that as well, but we will be joined by the law department at some point to hear what their opinion is.
That I'm not troubled by. I mean, we're going to have to fit a majority vote or supermajority. It depends on what the facts are and then the applicable law. I am troubled about having conversations in the summer in committee about these issues. We haven't heard from the full public. We've heard a lot of people tonight because I think these are the kinds of things that we still should talk through when people are available. But I just have a personal problem on the 24th. I'll be here on the 31st. Glad to talk about them, but I just can't say that.
I asked Jacqueline to poll the committee. All but you can attend the 24th, and everyone can attend the 31st. So, and I guess there was an earlier meeting where we had fewer people. So those are two dates in July that are
I'm not
available.
quarreling with the dates. I'm quarreling, I guess, with talking through these very important straw votes in that period of time.
If the committee feels we should open part of our sessions to hear further from members of the public, there were probably another 30 or so people who I saw hands raised and on this list who either left or remained and we didn't have time. So, and then there's the folks from Nonantum who asked for, or may ask for something as well.
Well, part of my concern is a process matter is we have public hearings so we can benefit from the public.
Yep.
And if we have that conversation first, then we have the conversation in committee, it feels more sequential rather than saying we're making decisions in committee on straw votes when we haven't had all the public hearing completed. And you've held it open with, I think, good cause, and I would think that we ought to do that.
Okay, I'm going to hear from what other people feel because I tell you what I feel, but President Albright.
Thank you. Oops. I ran out as the folks that were very distressed were leaving, and I got their names and email addresses, and they would be very happy if we would add time to speak.
In July.
Maybe we could add an hour, come meet an hour earlier and give people a chance to speak.
In July.
In July.
Okay.
And I think that the Nonantum folks might be happy to do that as well.
Okay. I don't see any reason not to do that. Any of us, of course, and any other members of the council who, for example, might have been in finance tonight, maybe joined us later, but I don't know. And, we can all watch the public hearings after the public hearing in time to inform our conversations in committee. Which I don't know about you, but I do that quite a bit. So I think, we've got our meetings in July. We have to keep moving forward. We do have a deadline. We have meetings in September. If we feel by our second meeting in July that we need another meeting in, say, early August, I know everybody wants a break, but we'll do that, because we do have to meet the deadline. There's really not, I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't meet the deadline. We've got some work to do. We have some refinements to make. We have, the body of this needs to be put together in its final form, language, et cetera. But I do believe we have a lot to talk about, even from what we've heard so far. Councilor Leary?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wholeheartedly agree with President Albright's comment about more public input included in some of our meetings. I think that's really important. I do want to keep on the schedule. I know Councilor Baker has brought up quite a few concerns, and some of them I think we've talked to in some depth, and I think we've been very, very thoughtful all along. What I don't want is a lot of delay, which is sort of what I'm hearing there. I just want to be clear on that. Let's get those questions answered, and let's move it on. We have to make this deadline. I want to hear more from the public. I think we can do all those things.
thank
I
you.
just want to say, I'm not in favor of delay. I'm in favor of deliberation. So just be clear, my valued colleague.
Gotcha. Um, Okay. Anybody else?
I have I'd like to make another comment.
Counselor Wright, you still have your hand up?
Yep. You know, we've been going through this for like 2 years or so, or even longer. But the village centers, we've been really concentrating on it, and we've been, you know, picking it apart in pieces and this and that. I have another idea, which I think would be more amenable for more residents in the city, and I'm hoping at some point or at some meeting that I can present that too, instead of just trying to nitpick what you have there, and just have that discussion. It doesn't have to be in big detail, but I'd like to do that at some time in the future.
I'm not sure I followed you, Counselor Wright. You have an idea that you think is different from what we just said?
A plan for the zoning to meet the MBTA requirements, and also to rezone our village centers. And there's some similars, you know, and some by right, but it is different enough that I'd like to present that, just to have a discussion for an option. And I think my ideas would be more people would be, residents would be behind it than what is being proposed now. And we still will accomplish a lot of what we want to do.
So I'm not totally sure I follow you, but I think what you said, what you suggested is that you have some perhaps ideas for compromise that you'd like to present in July.
Yes.
Okay, that's what July is all about. So in July, when we come up to those various topics, we can hear, as Councilor Baker said, amendments that might be proposed to the text, which would be the formal way to do it, and we can take straw votes on those things.
So my ideas, though, is more, instead of piecemealing what you have here, it would make more sense to kind of present it as a whole instead of bits and pieces here. And then go into it and say, okay, in this area, do this or do that, or things like that. But I think it'll be better to see it as a whole.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
I don't
Councilor Wright's
understand either,
proposal
but
at all. And I think what we need to do is get into the weeds sometimes and be, you know, the details are very important, obviously, in zoning. So, and yet the details make up the whole as well. So you have to look at it in both ways. But if you have a proposal, Councilor Wright, that you can put in writing or something that we can look at, I'd be happy to look at it. But right now, I'm really confused.
And Councilor
Okay.
President Albright, President Albright also has something on this.
So, because there was a controversy in Newtonville over VC3, VC2 in the main areas, I looked at detail. I spent some time with planning staff and looked at detail of how the zoning applies to the village of Newtonville, looking at what are the rules, what are the areas, what is the implications, how high can things be here, there, and everywhere. And I think it was a very instructive. I think without going into that level of detail for your own village or whatever village you're interested in, or all the villages, you won't really understand what's happening with this zoning code, because there are protections that have been built into the code that override the VC3 and the VC2. They have to do with how close you are to residential areas and how close you are to other things. So if we could have any time to look at the villages with that perspective, you know, what's really going to happen in this village with the protections built into it, I think it would help us have a better understanding of what this really means for each village.
I'm going to suggest that anyone who wants to do that for a particular village come up with a discrete list of, as in a finite list of questions or proposals about the shape that this ordinance would take in a specific area and bring a proposal forward. Not sure what else to say at this late hour. But I agree with Councilor Leary. Councilor Wright, if you have something specific that you want to share with us, I think it would be helpful if that were in writing before we have our next meeting.
Councilor Wright, I would be happy to share the 2-page document that I was able to create, which gave me a better sense of what's going to happen in Newtonville. And maybe that's another way of looking at the details and the whole at the same time.
I would very much like to see that document. Right now, I'm going through with a spreadsheet and calculations and what's the, with the setbacks, and if it's abutting residential and it's more and this and that, and going through and doing that calculations. I know the MBTA has their formula. I'm going through, the massings of the buildings that are allowed and taking other things into consideration. And also mapping out what is not being counted, like the priority streets and things like that, which you're still going to have things built on it, but it's not being counted towards the 8,330 units. And I'm doing it for all the villages. I've only done it for 3 so far, making my way through it right now. But I will write this up, and this is something we can discuss in July.
Yeah. Folks, I think I see a lot of tired faces, and I think
some people have to go to work tomorrow.
People have to go to work tomorrow, and I think we're not making any progress at the moment. I think we should prepare ourselves for our July meeting with whatever it is we want to raise.
But let me ask a question about preparation, if I can, Madam Chair.
Sure.
One of the issues that we discussed last time was not doing an analysis of every community, but UTIL presented in the feasibility analysis 2 parcels, and the question I thought that I heard from the president and several of us was, what happens if the parcels adjacent to it are developed the same way? Just to understand the context, because you might, as a result of that, say, well, I'd prefer a bigger setback, or maybe I'd prefer a different height. But without that context, I think we're flying a bit blind. So I wondered if the department, as part of its process, can give us that context analysis in a few places. So you say, all right, here's the test site we did, but here's the adjacent properties on either side, and what happens if they're built out the same as the zoning allows, and then what does that look like? Does that inform our judgment? I think that's an important part of the public process.
Okay, I think we hear that. I think we brought that up before. I'm going to suggest that we need to have a debrief with staff and find out what they're going to be able to do in a month's time.
That's fair enough, but I just don't want to lose that, because I think it really may both clarify some choices we have to make, but also, otherwise we're dealing with just the test sites and a general concept that's very large. We don't have the kind of grounded understanding that I think may make a difference to both us and the public. But that's it.
Okay. I'm looking for Councilor Krinsman for a motion.
I am here, and Madam Chair, I believe that we need to take no action on the public hearing because that stays open, but I'll move hold on the items.
2 items on both items, correct?
Correct.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Good night, everyone. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Brown, with your...
Can I have a motion from the planning board to keep our hearing open and continue it in coordination with the zoning and planning committee?
So moved.
Everyone in favor? Aye?
Aye.
All right.
It's unanimous in both entities. Thank you so much. Most of the public has left the room, but thank you so much for sticking with us till the end. Those of you who did, really appreciate it. Appreciate your comments and your civility. Thank you.